Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thank you very much for tuning into this episode of Gabbin with Gavin. This episode is brought to you by Town Brewery. Go to townbrewery.ca, use the promo code Gavin at checkout, save yourself 10% off any order. Thank you for tuning in.
Welcome to Gabbin with Gavin.
Gavin and Clark has been selling vintage clothing in downtown Whitby for over 3 years.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thank you for tuning in. This is episode 20 of the Gavin with Gavin podcast. I'm joined in 1990 studios today with a very, very special guest. He is a legend in the vintage clothing game.
Thank you, sir.
I would say, I would like to say the Godfather, but we're gonna touch. There's a Godfather beyond in the Heifetz family.
Son of Godfather.
Yeah, the son of the Godfather. Jesse Hiefetz is in the studio today. He's the co-owner of Heifetz and Frank. He's a collector, an archivist.
Yeah,
you do it all, man.
Yep, co-owner of Frankie Collective as
Frankie
well.
Collective, absolutely.
And a lot of other different things, and not just in clothing, but yeah, here I am. Thanks so much for having me,
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much for joining us. You wear a lot of hats, and we're going to touch on it. You're a producer. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Absolutely, you got it.
I would like to, for anybody tuning in who's not familiar with you, I'd like to kind of set the scale.
Sure.
Right away. Between you, your brother, your dad, you guys have been since 67, you were saying, the Dawn started. Mm-hmm. If you had to try to put some kind of number on it, how many pieces of clothing do you think have come through?
Wow, that is an incredible question.
I want people who are tuning in to try to get some kind of, I know it's a lot to drop on you. Like, we're not talking a couple pieces a day kind of thing.
No, we're in the millions of pieces of clothing.
Yeah, that's
easily. I couldn't tell you, like, that's as far as I'm going to go with trying to make an educated guess, but we're definitely in the millions of pieces of clothing. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the time period, 67, now we're 2021. I mean, like, hey, it speaks for itself. You know what I mean? It's like we're well into 60 years of basically of doing this thing, you know, and collectively, if you broke it down, like how many years Drew, me, and my dad and combine that, it's like,
uncountable.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, 80 years, 100 years of working in this industry collectively. Millions of pieces of clothing, man.
I just really wanted people to realize, like, this isn't a part-time reseller. You're not new to the game.
No, not at all.
You guys have moved millions of units. It's crazy. It's inspiring to people like me, and then the newer generation of vintage to really see like everything you guys have done. I just wanted to kind of open with that.
Sure,
just so people know what's going on.
This is the real deal,
This is
people.
the real deal, everybody.
We're not fucking around. This is the real shit.
And I mean, no disrespect at all to small time resellers and stuff like that. But you've been in the vintage game 30 years now.
Yeah, I mean it's a tough loaded question because realistically, I've been in the vintage game since I was born.
Yeah.
My dad started in the vintage clothing industry in 1967. So my brother and I, and my sister, Whitney, although she doesn't participate anymore, we grew up in it. You know, we grew up in and around it. Yep. We grew up playing in our dad's stores and his warehouses when we were little kids. In the 80s, we were his kid models in his catalogs. This is like before internet, when you actually had printed media. So, like, from that perspective, I've been in it for my whole life. I actively started in it, like working, per se, in the industry for my dad in the mid-'90s when I was in high school, early mid-'90s, in the summers. So, you know, like, I had a few shitty summer jobs as my first jobs, like, you know, dish pig and just doing crappy jobs. But then I think it was a number of things. I was starting to become more interested in fashion, and my dad, you know, likely needed more hands-on in his business. So I started working for him in the summers and So I worked for him for a fair period of time, and then I went to university, and obviously that stopped. After university, I went to Western and audio recording school in London, Ontario. That was around 97-ish. After that, I moved to back to Toronto because my brother and I grew up in Niagara region, Niagara-on-the-Lake. So after that, I moved back to Toronto, started doing shitty jobs again because I was trying to really make a living, having a go at making a living in the music industry because that's one of my passions. And it was really difficult. So, I was working like these shitty jobs at bars at night and then doing music during the day and on weekends. And it was just tough to make ends meet. My brother and I grew up with a pretty comfortable lifestyle. My dad and mom were always entrepreneurs and, provided us with a lot of opportunities, a lot of things. And so I was accustomed to a lifestyle that definitely wasn't living for a number of years after university. And I started working for my dad again when I was living in Toronto because a lot of although he was based in Niagara, and his business at the time was based in Buffalo, New York, most of his sourcing was coming from Toronto. So it was kind of a natural move because I had worked with him for such a long time to start working with him again in the capacity of picking and then eventually overseeing his picking team in Toronto. And again, this is like late 90s, early 2000s. So probably from around 98 till, let's say, like 2001-ish. And just to touch on that, because I know there's a preconceived notion from a lot of people in the industry. There's a division that's being pushed by a lot of people on socials of like this division between like old head mentality, new head mentality. I'm all head. Okay?
Put on a t-shirt.
And I mean, take it how you want it. But and my brother is as well.
Yep.
We don't have a side agenda. We're not doing this to be like to maintain like some status quo of like we got to be old heads and we've got to stick to our guns and fuck the new guys and fuck the little guys and fuck the Disney shirts. Do I love Mickey Mouse shirts or Aladdin t-shirts? I don't. Do I appreciate them? Yes. Is there nostalgia there? Yes. And I don't diss that stuff. I mean, maybe you might catch a little diss on a sneak diss on an Instagram post, but it's all in fun.
Absolutely.
It's not serious. And just shows my age more than anything. But, we're inclusive. We are supportive of the community. We're supportive from the people that thrift and pick on their part-time and have a full-time job working at Rogers or whatever and sell all the way up to the biggest wholesalers, wheelers and dealers, the true heads, the Japanese collectors, the old heads in the States that have supplied the Japanese industry for 30, 40 years. Everyone and anyone in this industry, if you're in used clothing, if you're in vintage clothing, we support you. We want you to be in it. The more the merrier. Let's push this to the masses. Oh, yeah. And that's kind of our general mantra or mentality, so to speak.
I love that, man. That was something I really wanted to get to and kind of get your opinions on.
Yeah.
Kind of the new versus the old per se. But let me ask you, do you think maybe part of the reason you have such a cool attitude about things, I think maybe part of the way you feel that way is because you guys were born into vintage. You guys were the really young guys, and I'm sure you guys had to deal with the older heads in the game at one point.
100%.
Making fun of the stuff that you guys picked. And
100%, man.
I do really want to go back to the back.
We will.
Don't
worry.
But this is, yeah.
We can jump around.
I'm so intrigued by the early days. This is the era that's like.
It's interesting. That's a great question. Really great question. Drew and I have been selling. We're dual citizens. Our dad's originally from New Hampshire. Okay. My mom was born and raised in Toronto. They met in Toronto when my dad moved to Toronto to open stores in Toronto, and he was kind of sick of the New England thing. And there's more backstory there. If we have time, we can get into that. But so I'm a dual citizen, so I can do business in the States. Hence, we've been doing the Rose Bowl swap meet flea market. And if for any of the listeners that aren't familiar with that, it is the biggest, baddest, best flea market in the entire world. Hands down. There's no contest. That's actually a fact. It happens every second Sunday of every month in Pasadena in the parking lot of the Rose Bowl Stadium. And we've been doing it for at least 15 years. It's kind of mecca for vintage clothing because it's where all of the Japanese retailers, a lot of European retailers, a lot of Australian and New Zealand retailers come to buy stock for their retail stores. It's also kind of a meeting of the minds place for all the vintage people. It's where, you're going to get the most money for your stuff. It's a very historic place. It has its like I said, it's Mecca. It's ground zero for vintage clothing in the world. So we've been selling there for over 15 years. And a lot of the old heads that when we started, we were the new kids. We'll go into this later, but, Drew and I with Heifetz and Frank were one of the, if not the first kind of vintage clothing company that really started doing 90s and streetwear vintage, sportswear vintage, as a unique commodity, as a unique selling point. When I started, I was selling Western shirts, polyester disco shirts, bell-bottom jeans, hippie dresses, and all that kind of stuff. That's what was in vogue. 80s concert shirts, 70s and 80s T-shirts. When I started on my own, so, after I stopped working for my dad, he took off for Vermont. He opened a big store in Vermont called Greener Pastures in Burlington, Vermont. And it was like kind of a cross between a vintage store and a Value Village, but it was as big as a Value Village.
Awesome. What year are we talking here?
We're talking around 2000, 2001. Okay. So I worked for him for a couple years here in Toronto, picking and overseeing the picking team for him. And my dad was always he liked to buy big. And he didn't mind carrying inventory. And me and my brother have learned more from my dad than anybody else in this industry. So one of the lessons we've learned is to not sit on a lot of inventory. My dad had a different mentality, and he did great for himself, and it wasn't wrong. But we've learned from some of the things, some of his downfalls. He would find a deal in Germany or Belgium because he did a lot of army surplus as well.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you. Something just clicked to me. Mm-hmm. How would he find stuff internationally before the internet was popping? And
okay, so
not to ask for the sauce.
No, there's nothing off limits here. Curious. There's nothing off limits here. That's another thing that Drew and I, we kind of both have always embraced is sharing information. I think it's essential for the future generations, helping people. We believe in karma. We believe in spreading the love. And if you just hold it all to yourself, it just dies with you. You know what I mean? And I want to help people. I want to help you. I want to help, Retrez. I want to help Loco. I want to help anybody that crossed my path. If you have a question for me and it's not directly taking food off my plate, I'm an open book. You know what I mean? So they used to have, so in the 70s, they had a show called The Boutique Show, which actually ran into the 90s. I did some of them with my dad in the 90s. This was a trade show in New York. It was like Magic, if you've heard of Magic in Vegas.
Okay.
But it was really hip. The first boutique shows were actually held in a hotel. And so all the vendors would have to get a hotel room, bring their samples into the hotel room, and it was almost like a party. And you can imagine it's the 70s, there's fucking People are drinking. There's probably cocaine and weed and whatever, and everyone's having a good time. But everyone's writing orders too, right? So you have your samples there, and you're writing orders.
That's how the really big ones came in.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how you buy big.
So they had those things, right? So then you also had the vendors there that, you know, if you're a vendor, you meet other guys that are in the game, wholesaling, and then you'd also meet buyers, because international buyers would come, not just domestic buyers. Guys from Europe would come, right? But that wasn't the only show. They had the ASD show in Vegas, which is the Associated Surplus Dealers show. Big trade show. And that was surplus. So that you could have been buying anything there from, you know, wrenches and overrun, like, you know, second quality clothing, new clothing, to military surplus. And there was a handful of vintage clothing dealers. So it was through trade shows and events like that. But it was also through just hitting the ground. What do they say on American Pickers? They freestyle.
Oh, the freestyle,
right?
Yeah, freestyle the back roads.
So they would freestyle. My mom and dad, you know, they would go to Europe, and my dad by himself a lot, and go to Europe, and he would know, like, through the grapevine, through that network, because it was all networking, right? Like, he would sell to, like, this Army surplus dealer and that Army surplus dealer domestically, and they would all talk, and they would, oh, where'd you get these East German backpacks? Oh, you got to get them from this guy. Like, he's got tons of stuff, and he's in Brussels. And so, you know, you'd go to Brussels, and you go see the guy, and then you'd get put onto another guy. Anybody else you could put me onto here? And, you know, and the list goes on. And then it's just networking, right? Grassroots networking. And, but he was the kind of guy who would be like, I found these World War II Army bags, and I can buy them for a nickel, but I got to buy 50,000 of them. And he'd just fucking do it, right? And so, because he knew, it was like, well, I'm buying for a nickel. I'm going to sell these for $5.
It's money.
It's money. I don't know how quickly I'm going to sell 5,000 of them, but he would buy deals, right?
Yep.
So at one point, he had a shitload of inventory. Like, I'm talking a warehouse full with pallet racking and gaylords of this and that and the other. And I can only imagine the stuff, because when I was working for him, mind you, when I was a teenager, at his big warehouse in Buffalo, New York, Niagara Falls, New York, which is at the Niagara Falls airport. It was closed down. It was this massive building from wartime, World War II, and he had this huge space there. But I can only imagine the stuff that I touched, because he was never into vintage like that, okay? At the same time he was doing vintage, like on that scale, the internet wasn't around, okay? Or was barely maybe around, you know, like if you had dial-up. But no one was really doing business online at that point. He was supplying a lot of Japanese customers, European customers, tons of customers in America, supplying their stores. His main gig was wholesale. Although he did have stores, you know, he had South Pacific stores in Toronto in the 70s and 80s. He had South Pacific stores in Buffalo, but his main money was coming from wholesale. And so, you know, through doing that, like, we were going through so much volume, right? So we'd get Levi's jeans in, and it'd be 501s. But we weren't looking for red lines and Big E's. That wasn't really his thing. Mm-hmm. It was like, well, I bought these jeans for $1, and I'm getting $10 for them. I just get them in and get them out. You know what I mean? Even before that, before I was born, you know, we can get into his backstory if we want later. But before I was born, he used to find all the guys that would get the number 2s, overruns, irregulars from Levi's and buy all of them, like container loads, right? And you know, that stuff was worth a mint. But his thing was like, well, I buy them for like $1 or $2, and I can sell them in my Toronto store on Yonge Street for $20. They're brand new Levi's. They're just like slightly irregular or number 2s or whatever. And so he just made a ton of business doing that. I didn't know about all that stuff at this point in time. I'd see cool things, you know, inherently. You'd see things, you're like, this is rad.
Looks cool, yeah.
This looks cool. Or like you'd see a t-shirt and you'd be like, oh, this is cool. You know, I like the subject matter. You're like,
I watched this.
Yeah,
I know this band, rapper. Yeah.
Exactly, right? And I mean, that was even before rappers, because rappers were just...
It blows my mind thinking about that like in the 2000s, nobody was buying a 1995 Made in USA rap tee. Those were still in the gas stations and like...
And I mean, even before that, like in the early to mid 90s when I was working for him in the summer, like when I was out of high school, I just worked for him in the summer. It's like there were no rap tees, you know, unless you were going to that show and you got it that night.
Yeah, wow.
Not in the secondhand market, there weren't any rap tees. So, yeah, it's interesting because, like, you know, definitely some incredible collectible, extremely valuable garments went through his place, but that wasn't his shtick.
Yeah.
He stopped. He got, like I said, he moved to Vermont, did his greener pastures thing. At that point, I had been working for him, managing his picking team in Toronto, and I had an assistant by the name of Madison who went on, she went on to open her own store on Roncesvalles, which was successful for a number of years, but this is, again, 20 years ago. And at that point, when he left, he was like, listen, he calls me Jake, which is weird. I don't know. Why do you do that, Dad? My name is Jesse, but he calls me Jake. Jake, you know, I'm moving to Vermont. We had amassed so much product for him because we had this picking team of like 5 girls, plus myself. And we had amassed so much clothing in 1,000-pound bales that he was like, I'm good for years. So I'm dissolving the picking company and I'm moving to Vermont. I'm opening the store. And I was kind of like, fuck. You know, I was still working at bars at night, but doing this in the day. And he said, listen, you know, I don't want to leave you high and dry. So I'm getting out of wholesale, but one of my best wholesale customers is this guy, Mark, who owns the store called The Alley in Chicago. And he had another store called Jive Monkey in Chicago at the time. And he said, look, he's a great wholesale customer. If you want to continue with him, why don't you keep Madison, who's like my right-hand girl there, and why don't you guys just do your own thing, and you guys can keep picking and wholesale to him.
What sort of stuff what sort of stuff are they buying?
They're buying 80s T-shirts, but mind you, we were probably selling for $3.
Yeah, crazy.
Like every 80s T-shirt, basically, right? That was like an item. We were selling like every Western Snap shirt, every polyester disco shirt, every motorcycle jacket we would find, every pair of polyester plaid nerd pants, jeans, like certain models of jeans, certain types of sweaters and sweatshirts, like just, you know, like what you would have seen in Kensington Market at that time. Okay? Mm-hmm. Hippie stuff and Western stuff, whatever it was. And we were supplying those 2 stores. And that was good, you know, that was good for a while. And then because we were picking every day and doing that, we, I started kind of branching out and reaching out to more accounts because I'm like, well, this is great that we have this one account, but like, just got to be more people we can supply. And so, you know, I started soliciting people, and I started here at home. So I started hitting up all the Toronto shops that I knew, a lot of which were picking themselves. So like, no, we don't need stuff. But some of them had started to do online, particularly 69 vintage. This guy, Jesse and Richard and Jesse. So they own 69 vintage. They went on to open like Parts and Labor, Dog and Bear.
Oh, cool.
The Hoxton. They transitioned out of vintage. They're very smart guys. They took their money that they made in vintage and then went into the restaurant industries because they were bartenders before, and they knew that for sustainability of their vintage business and for where they really wanted to be at in life, it wasn't going to happen overnight in vintage. But it could potentially happen overnight in entertainment, food, beverage, blah, blah, blah. So that's what they did. I think they're even partners in Ace Hill now.
Oh, cool. So they're not all right.
Yeah, they've done well.
Yeah.
So I started supplying them and a few other guys in town.
Did you connect with them, like, because you were saying you were working bars and that, and they were in the bar industry as well? Was that kind of how you guys?
No, it was. How did I connect with them? I think I connected with them through Madison, who was working with me at the time, because she was more of a nightlife girl downtown. I was more going to raves and like hip hop shows, but she was more like in that hipster, like, I wouldn't even say it was like pre-hipster, but it was like
just cool.
Like the cool Queen West crowd that was like kind of doing what I was like a little bit more forward, and I was more urban.
We got to talk about some of those 90s, like 2000s concerts.
100%. So she was like, "Oh, I met these guys, Richard and Jesse, at some party or something, and they're in vintage and they want to meet us." And also David Himmel, who's one of my mentors in the vintage clothing business, like kind of after my dad had moved away. He kind of taught me a lot about the new, like the real vintage, true vintage, like what to look at. Like, you're selling all your leather jackets, Jess, for $25, but this one here is worth $500. And so he taught me that shit, okay? He was a leather guru, and he's gone on to start Himmel Brothers Leather. He lives near Kensington Market. He's an OG. He was partners with Dennis from House of Vintage before they split, and that's when Dennis opened his other thing, and David went his other way. But he was also close friends with Richard and Jesse from 69. And so, yeah, there was like some synergy there between like Madison meeting them, and then David was like, "Oh, I know those guys," because he was buying and selling from them too, because he was into true vintage, and those guys were into true vintage. So it's how it started was they were like, "We want to buy every 80s t-shirt." And they were paying me like double what like my other wholesale customers were paying me. So I was like, done deal. And you're local, I don't have to ship it. Like, I just drop it off. Amongst other items, they were like, "Bring us anything like that you think is cool and vintage and da-da-da." But they were smart too. They didn't give out too much information. They held it pretty close to their chest. So I'd bring them bags, and they would go through it, and they'd pull out whatever they pulled out and offer me what they wanted. And to be honest with you, I was none the wiser, because I was just kind of green, and I'm like, well, if it's more than I'm getting for wholesale, it's more money, let's do it. But they had this whole operation going. So it wasn't in their store that I would see them. They had a warehouse on Dundas in a interesting old warehouse loft space building that's now long gone. And we used to go there, me and Madison, or me by myself, and they had like 3-4 guys working on computers. And this is like early internet days. Now we're talking like 2000, 2001, okay? And they had all these racks with tons of clothes, everything hung. And like everything with a tag on it, like with some big long number. And Madison and I were like racking our brains, like, what the fuck is going on here? Like, what are they doing? And just through some detective work and some sly kind of like figuring it out, we surmised that they were on eBay, which was a very new thing at that
20
time.
years ago.
Yeah. It was like they were like one of the first people out the gate on that, And, I went home that night, sold them stuff, went home that night, got on my computer, tried to find them on eBay, was unfamiliar with eBay from the jump. So the interface was like, I didn't know how to use it. I didn't know how to find these people, right?
It probably wasn't as smooth. Or
it
was not as user-friendly.
Yeah, it wasn't.
In 2000, 2001 as it is in 2021.
Exactly. It wasn't as intuitive. Like, you couldn't, like, they were still working out a lot of kinks.
Sure.
So I didn't find them that night. So the next time we went, sorry, Richard and Jess, but I'm just going to speak the fucking truth because that's how I am. Madison kind of, she was a good looking girl and she had the gift of gab. So she kind of chatted them up and kind of like distracted them. And I was just looking through the racks because they always said like, "Oh, you guys look through the racks," because they wanted us to look and see maybe, "Oh, you guys are buying these. I see these. I'll pick them for you." You know what I mean? So I was encouraged to go through the racks, but I had brought a pen and a piece of paper. So I wrote down a bunch of these numbers that I seen on the tags, knowing that this had to have some correlation to this eBay thing. Because you could see on the screens that some of these guys were on eBay. Some of these guys were on things as well. But like we kind of surmised this has got to be eBay,
Put
right?
the pieces together.
Put the pieces together. So that night I got home and I did find them on eBay. And these t-shirts that we were selling them for like $6 or whatever it was, they were all going for 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 US dollars. Like these are the days of you cannot fucking miss on eBay. There was not many vintage people selling on there. Tons of buyers, especially international buyers, because it was a way for them to acquire what they needed without incurring the travel expenses. Right?
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
Right? So
they have all kinds of extra money to play with now.
So they had tons of money. That's why they were throwing money around left and right. Not to mention the fact that they were also dealing with some high-end guys in New York, like What Comes Around Goes Around, Seth and Gerard. Shout out you guys. Those guys are some OGs from New York. So they had great accounts. And how that all, this is sidebar, but how that all came about, they were bartenders prior, and Richard was from England, and his sister married a guy, so his brother-in-law had a vintage clothing store in England, and he knew that there's a ton of vintage clothing in Toronto. So he asked Richard, hey, can you look into this vintage clothing thing in Toronto? And that's how they had kind of figured it out. Oh, shit, there's all these rag houses here. And they went. They were smart, man. They were like, when everyone else was selling a shirt for $5, they were selling it for $20. You know, they were smart guys. So they had the ability to go run around and be like, I'm going to take the line because I'm going to pay you at this time, you know, when guys were paying $1 and $2 a pound, I'm going to pay you $3.50 a pound, kick everyone out. And sure enough, everyone's out, right? So they were able to run the gamut and kind of take control of a lot of things. And they also had everyone and their uncle who was an independent picker, which at that point in time, way less numbers than there are now, but still significant. And anyone who was doing it at that time had a pretty good grasp of it. So everyone was selling to them. So once I figured out that they were selling on eBay and I saw what our stuff was going for, and I saw actually what like a lot of the stuff that we actually sold them was going for, I was like, okay, it's on. This is fucked. So Madison and I went to Best Buy, bought a digital camera, which at that point in time was like a lot of money. Figured out, we had our dial-up internet. We went and spent we had started to put aside, this is prior, like once we started to put aside like the music shirts and stuff, because at one point in time, we were selling them everything.
Yeah.
The rock shirts, the cool, weird, funky shirts, the Nike things, like everything was just take it. I had my dad's mentality. It was just like, get it in, get it out, move product, turn it. So at that, so like we had started like collecting all the good shirts. So when we figured that out, we were like, okay, we got to do a Photoshop. We bought a digital camera at Best Buy, set up an eBay account, spent an afternoon at my apartment, me and my ex-girlfriend's apartment with a case of beer on like a Friday evening. That's when everyone would model shirts. So she modeled all the shirts. And I took the pictures, and the first week we did, I don't know, it was like, wasn't many items, man. It was like 50 items or 70 items, and we did $1,500 US. And at that time, the dollar was trading in the 40 to 45 cent range. So, like, think about that, right? Like,
it's crazy.
So at that point, I was like, okay, this is a game changer.
It must have felt like you just flipped everything on its head. Like
it was just totally blew my mind. I was like, okay, this shirt that I potentially sell for $6, I just got 40 US for.
Yeah, 60. You're getting 10 times.
Yeah, 10 times, right? So, yeah, that just blew open the doors.
That must have just lit a fire. Like that must have just got you so pumped up. Like, because you had access to the product, and now you're kind of realizing all the same things I have in my possession
Absolutely.
are now. And so let's go.
Absolutely.
Right?
So needless to say, I didn't want to burn any bridges, so I continued to wholesale to Richard and Jesse, but I just got wise. So
Pick a few things out here.
yeah,
right?
so I'd pick, the top 10, 15% of the stuff. Yeah. And then eventually they got wise because they're like, where's all the best shit that's hitting? And it was like, and I wear my feelings on my sleeve, and I just told them, like, guys, like, we are on eBay now. And I think they found us on eBay. No. And they're like, so you're on eBay now. That's where all the good stuff's going. I'm like, yeah. And I said, look, I'm still willing to wholesale you lots of stuff, if you want it. And I think we did continue a relationship. It obviously had changed, but, that's the way it went. And then I just went full bore, super, super heavy into it. And that's when because at that point in time, I was working only with one rag yard. And we pretty much had that rag yard to ourselves. But at that point, I branched out and I started hitting all kinds of rag yards. Started setting up deals, started hiring more pickers. Eventually, over that, and so then the other thing that I also did was because I was starting to get a really good grasp of the vintage clothing industry in a whole. Because, I had tunnel vision for a while, just working in the way that my father had kind of shown me.
Big wholesale flips.
Yeah, big wholesale flips, and like, this is the lane, that this is what I've done. But now I'm like, oh, there's this whole other world. So I started soliciting all kinds of customers for wholesale. Lots. Like at one point, probably we had 20 wholesale customers, Some of them were buying bulk, like big bulk amounts. Some of them were like, well, I just want this, and this, but I'll pay you like premium money for it, right? Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, we're doing eBay. So money's rolling, things are rolling. Unfortunately, I had a falling out with my partner at the time, Madison, which is, so often the case in this industry. Yep. She was a little bit older than me. She was like way more into nightlife and her social life. And I had like totally switched into like business mode because I was like, there's money to be made here and I'm hungry and I'm young and I want to fucking make it happen. So I was doing I was finding all of our new clients. I was the one that was dealing with and having the conversations with all the clients. Yeah. I was the one that was dealing with all the logistics of shipping large and small quantities, like we're talking like pallets on trucks to small boxes to, mostly the United States, but some international customers and like brokerage and customs and all these different things, like all the little things that you don't think about. But when you add them all up, it's a lot of fucking work, right? So, I kind of started feeling like that partnership was not fair because we had a 50-50 split down the middle, but I felt like, I'm doing 70% of the work and you're getting 50% of the profit. And again, like I have nothing to hide. So I'm telling it as it is. Yeah. And so I approached her and I just said, look, I'm willing to continue to work with you, but it's got to be a 70-30 split. And if you don't want to do that, then we'll just split all of our assets, all of our inventory right down the middle, and we can go our separate ways. And, it was an emotional, sad thing, but she chose to go her separate way. And I did too. And the rest is history, so to speak. I mean, after that, I just hired more. I went full bore, man. After that, I went like head first, right fucking into it. I hired a picking team. So I think initially I had like 2 or 3 pickers working for me because I'd branched out to other rag yards. I had my good friend Nick Prentice, who I grew up with in Niagara. He was like going to school or something at the time, like college. He's a naturopath now, so he had like, I don't know, umpteen billion years of school. But he had a lot of free time outside of school.
Loyal guy.
Yeah, and a loyal guy. He literally lived 3 doors down from me. So I hired him as my eBay guy. So he was posting and listing and shipping every day. And I was out running around the rag yards myself every day. Yep. And that's when I really realized, like, yeah, this is the thing for me, because I'm making money now that like professionals who have like really big degrees are making, and I'm just hustling, and I can like do what I want. I'm my own boss. I like to party. I like to, like, this is when I'm young, right? Like I'm in my 20s. I'm like, I like to go out to raves, and I like to do this. I like to go to hip hop shows, and I like to travel, you know, like I like to do things. So I'm like, fuck it all. I'm doing this. I'm doing it full time. I'm going head first, and that's it.
I love it, man. That was awesome, dude. It's cool hearing about those days, because like that's the stuff that really, being in the game, and that I have so much respect for the people who came before us, and like I love hearing those tales, man. It's really cool.
Yeah.
If I'm following the timeline correctly, we're coming back, or we're coming up on the SnapBack era.
Yeah, we're coming up on that.
This is the stuff, like I see the old pictures of you and your brother and you guys with the scores, man. Like please break this down, because I've listened to Drew's SnapBack Chronicles.
Yeah.
I've checked it out, and I feel like I'm just hearing the tip of the iceberg though, because those are the days that intrigue me. There's finds like that don't exist anymore.
Sure. So there's a bit of a backstory to that. So how that all came about was excuse me. Good beer, by the way. Shout out Town Brewery. I'm drinking this Square Wheels IPA. It's hitting every note right now. Loving it.
Use that promo code Gavin for 10% off at checkout.
Gavin, you got it. So okay. So continuing on in the lineage here, in the story, the timeline.
Am I jumping ahead?
No. We're segueing into that really quickly. I'll segue quickly into it. So at this point in time, sure, yeah. Thank you very much. At this point in time, I have a team of pickers. I have one or two people working eBay. Sorry, hold on. Like I said, I had my friend Nick working for me for eBay. My folks were still living in Niagara on the lake. Drew, my brother, fucked off to Whistler to pursue his snowboard career, which, by the way, he was a professional, and he placed third in the U.S. Open at 1 year. Like, he really did that shit.
I heard that in an old he was a very good snowboarder by
very
all
good
accounts.
Snowboarder. He was sponsored by Limited, Arnay, a whole bunch of companies. Like, he was in magazines. Like,
shout out Drew.
Drew really did that shit. Love you, bro. Killing the game. Whatever you do, you kill the game. So I had this picking team. One of my pickers, this girl by the name Janine Coburn, who actually went on to do her own stores. Shout out Janine. Shout out Coal Miner's Daughter. There's 4 or 5 Coal Miner's Daughter stores in Toronto right now. That's her.
Hell yeah.
Okay? So she used to pick for me. And one day I go to the rags and she's picking, and she's wearing a shirt that, because she came from her educational background was in costume design and fashion design. Okay? So I go to work one day to the rag yard, and she's picking, and she's wearing this really cool t-shirt that's like a mosaic cut up, like DIY.
Like a rework.
Of vintage t-shirts that she had cut up. And I'm like, what is that? And she's like, oh, it's just something I made. And I was like,
a whole new game.
yeah, I'm like, okay, like I'm an idea guy. I'm an entrepreneur. I like taking risks. I'm an idea guy. That's just me. So when I saw that, I was like, okay, game on. This is a fucking totally new revenue stream. This is a totally new thing. Nobody's doing this right now, except Pre-Loved at the time was doing something similar, but it was like very high priced, and it was a lot of knitwear and whatever. So I was like, can you make more of these? She's like, yeah. So I was like, all right, here's a bag of t-shirts. Go ham. Like, do what you want. And just on your time, bring them to me. So she did, and she was excited about it, and she brought them to me, and came up with all these great designs. And so I actually have to give shouts to my dad for this one, because he came up with the name. He said, you should call it Snap. So we called it Snap. And it was like my first rework brand. So Janine started it. She designed it. She sewed a lot of it. And she kind of transitioned out of picking into running Snap. At the same time, my friend Nick, who was running my eBay operation, right, like out of my spare bedroom in my 2-bedroom apartment in Liberty Village, was getting ready to go back to school. And my mom was just recently like looking to get out of her job. She worked for Inniskill Winery in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and she wanted to do something new. I was getting a lot of success. I was making money, man. Yeah. I was making money. I was doing probably more than they had expected me to do. And it was kind of like, wow, you're making money. Like, you've actually got a real thing going here. And so my mom and dad came to dinner one night in Toronto. We went out to dinner and we started chatting, and my mom was out of work and she was like, why don't we, here was the caveat. We were still on dial-up, I think, at the time. Okay? And so
there's so many
like the timeline, just so you know, everyone, I got to say this, that I can't, like, don't hold me to these exact years because it's all a bit blurry, but we were still on dial-up.
There's kids who are gonna be tuning into this and have no idea what, like, how much more. It's like, oh yeah, the internet was slower. It was. Yeah. It's not even the internet. It's a whole. If you pick up the phone, it shuts off.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like.
I used to get so hyped for that dial-up tone.
Yeah.
Time to go to WWF.com and see what happened.
Right. So we were on dial-up, and so we're like, okay, what are the roadblocks? Like, what are the roadblocks? What's holding us back from like taking this to the next level? Well, definitely speed of the internet. Dial-up is just like hindering our ability for growth immensely because it's just so fucking slow. So the high school I went to in Niagara-on-the-Lake was called Niagara District Secondary School. And Niagara really died down with respect to young people in the population. When I grew up there was lots of young people, lots of kids, lots of families. Then the wine industry kind of took over, the tourism industry like really took over, and there wasn't much place there for families anymore. Although there are some kids, obviously people have kids, there's families there, but when I went to the high school there, the whole high school was open. But then fast forward 10 years later, or whatever years later, what we're talking about now, they had shut down half the high school, just chained the doors. So they only used half the high school because that's how many students they had, right? And my mom, for some odd reason, I believe, was like, I know that Niagara District Secondary School has high-speed internet, which was a new thing at the time because they needed it, right? It was like infrastructure. It was for like, I guess you say essential people only, a term we know so well now from COVID. So they deemed obviously the district school board was essential to have this high-speed internet. Obviously, the plans were to roll it out to residential, but they were the first ones to have it. So we approached the school board and said, you got half this high school shut down. We want to rent a few classrooms, just empty them out and rent them, and we want to use your high-speed internet. And they were like, fuck yeah, because this is revenue that we're not going to see. Why not? It's empty space. Obviously, we had to pay for the internet, but who cares? It's like, now we can rip, right? And my mom was out of work, so she's like, I would love to run and oversee the whole eBay operation. So we started a different company. This is before Heifetz and Frank.
This is wild.
Called VQA Vintage, because in Niagara-on-the-Lake, it's a big wine industry. And the governing body for the wine industry is called VQA, which stands for Vintners Quality Alliance. And I was like, my mom worked for Inniskill, and I was like, it just came up one night. I was like, we're going to be called VQA, Vintage Quality Alliance. So we started that company. My mom overseed it, and it was great because there was all these high school students working on half the school, doing high school. So what we did is we hired high school students.
Sick.
We set up 6 computers, had them all running on high-speed internet, had one room full of racks. We had one room for shipping, and then we had one room where me and my dad were doing wholesale. so we just filled it with bins. We've constructed all these bins, and we'd have guys come down and pick. And
this straight up sounds like the Apple garage. You know what I mean? Like the beginning.
Yeah, this is like some Amazon shit.
This is the beginning of the empire.
Yeah. So that was great. So what we were able to do is we're able to hire all these high school kids for minimum wage because there's no jobs and everyone was making minimum wage back then anyways. And it's right in your own school. Plus we were able to hire kids that had like spares. So they're like, I got 2 spares after lunch. So we're like, okay, you get to come in for 2 hours and just like bang up like 40 items on eBay.
Make a few bucks.
Which
is perfect for a high school kid.
Yeah. And then we also had like some full-time kids, right? That were like just fresh out of high school but didn't want to go to university yet. Just local kids. And a lot of them were like my little sister's friends. You know, they were like, oh, you're hiring? And I'm like, yeah, come work for me and my mom. You know us already.
Yeah.
Like, it's easy. You take pictures of clothes, you post them up on eBay, you ship them, you answer questions, blah, blah, blah. It's fucking easy. We crushed, dude. We crushed. We fucking crushed. I was in so many rag yards at this point in time because we had the infrastructure to have like 5 people listing all day, every day.
And now you're high speed.
And we're high speed internet now, right? So we were doing that. And then my mom and dad eventually decided they were going to move to BC, as well as my sister and my grandmother, who was living with them at the time. So my grandmother had a house on Finch and Bathurst, but she was getting too old to live by herself. So I moved into her house, made an agreement with my mom and my aunt that like I was going to pay like all the expenses for maintenance, all the property tax, like any expense, but they just didn't want to rent it to someone because they were all in BC and they didn't have anyone to manage it. So they didn't want to come home to like a fucked up house, crack house, right? Yeah. So I was like, I'll fucking pay for this because the market was down. They wanted to wait for the market to go up just before they sold it. So I was like, I'm there. Like, you know, I'd already had kind of been warehousing a lot of shit in the basement, which, by the way, Drake came to that basement 3 times. Drake and Oliver El Khatib, Ollie, came to that basement 3 times to buy low. DJ AM came to that basement.
Man, it's the. This is one of the fun questions I had for the end, but I know you guys have had some of the most like insane. I was you guys like Beyoncé.
Yeah, Beyonce came to our store, made us shut the whole shit down.
That's wild, man. Like Mac Miller. Like you guys have had some of the coolest people come through and like
a lot of great people.
You guys are very like it's very you guys don't it's not a post every day showing it or whatever too, right? Like like you guys are very humble about some of the stuff you've had happen. And I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that's happened behind the scenes and that we don't know about, but
there's a lot of
cool stuff.
A lot of behind the scenes and a lot of the shit that we just have been basically like asked and or more or less told like, you know, hold this down kind of thing. There's a lot of shit, man. But we can get into all that. Yeah. But yeah, Drake came to that basement. So I moved up to that basement. I moved up to that house to take care of that house. And it was great because I was living with my ex-girlfriend. We were living in Liberty Village, you know, paying considerable rent. Although this is way before it was gentrified. It was all like studios and like it was all lofts and it was very industrial and warehouse still. But it was fucking rad. I loved it. But I was like, this little 2-bedroom apartment or this like, you know, post-war bungalow with a big-ass backyard and a garage and a basement. Gone. See ya. So I moved up there. Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Aunt Joanne. Thanks, Grandma. Rest in peace. So I started running my warehouse out the basement there. I moved my eBay operation there because my parents had moved to BC. And I was hiring more pickers because I was always hiring. You know, pickers is a funny job. It's kind of like on a whole, this vintage industry is very incestuous. I don't mean that in a derogatory, like defamatory, like ew sex way. It's just incestuous in the way that like, you know, you'll hire a guy who came from another guy, and then he leaves you, and then he
100%.
starts R&T vintage,
100%.
you know, and it's just it's very like that, and I'm not mad at that.
It's everyone's journey.
It's everyone's journey. Everyone's got a place and a place to go. We support that shit. You know, it's like look at Sean Aventini, you know, Drew's assistant in Vancouver, one of our employees. Shout out Sean.
Awesome TikToks.
Yeah, awesome TikToks, and it's like he wanted to do his thing right out the gate when he came to work for us, and we're like, yeah, do your own thing, dude. You know what I mean? Like, I'm all for it. Like, and I always have been all for it. And I'll get into that because there's some
because that's not the norm.
That's not the norm, and there's some things that have happened in that, like, in that realm that have really like stuck with me and pissed me off and like kept me up at night. That never had to be that way, but it's just like old mentalities and characters and characteristics that, you know, with certain people that just that's the way they look. But anyways, we'll get into that. So I had this. So now I'm living in this house on Finch and Bathurst. I have my warehouse there. I'm doing tons of business with all kinds of accounts. I'm supplying like I'm wholesaling to like stores all over the world, but mostly in North America and a lot in Toronto.
Drake's coming through.
I'm running a full-time eBay thing. And then, so what I did, jumping back a little bit here. So with the Snap thing, okay, with Janine, Snap. So what I do is I start hiring seamstresses that have all their machines at home. So I'll do weekly rounds. Because I didn't want to rent a facility, buy the machines, do that whole
Overhead.
thing. It was just like, I don't want to take all that on. I'm like, do you sew? Yeah. Do you got a serger? Yeah. Do you got a straight stitch? Yeah. Okay. It was all piecework. It wasn't by the hour. It was like, I pay this much for one of these. I pay this much for one of these styles, you know? So you could take as long as you want.
Sure.
You want to watch Law and Order and drink beer and do 3 an hour? You're going to get that pay. If you want to head down and do 20 an hour, you're going to get that pay. Didn't matter to me because my costs were static, right? So I'd do my rounds once a week. I would fill my van with rag, go drop it all off at all these different ladies' places. And I only say ladies because that's what they were. I would always hire men, you know, male seamstresses too. So just putting that out there. Don't fucking cancel me. So I'll drop that shit, and then a week later, I'll go do my rounds, pick them up, and write them a check.
Sick.
Right? And then I was wholesaling it, and I was selling it at shows. So how that came about is one Christmas, I go back to Niagara. This is before my parents left. We're jumping around the timeline here. But this is before my parents left to go to BC. I go to Niagara for Christmas, and I brought some of the Snap pieces that I was making. And I'm like, look, you know, just showing my family, just sharing with my family. Like, look at, this is like one of the new things I'm doing. Like, check out these cool things. We're like making them out of T-shirts, and we make these out of sweatshirts, and we made this out of like whatever it was, right? And my sister's like, these are so cool. And at this point, she's maybe a freshman or a sophomore at Guelph University. And she's like, these would kill at my school. And at my school in the, what is it? Like the student union center where they have like the cafeteria and all that shit, right? The student union center, she's like, there's always vendors set up there selling posters, selling flags, selling, I don't know.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever's cool for college.
Yeah.
Kids.
Whatever's cool at the time, right? She's like, you should set up. And I was like, that's a great idea. So I was like, fuck, I tried it. I contacted the school. I finally got in touch with the dude who, you know, booked it and ran it. And he was like, yeah, come down. He's a super rad dude. He had dreads. He's this like kind of hippie guy. And he was like super rad. And he was like, oh man, I love this vintage clothing. Like, you know, blah, blah, blah. Like I'm a hippie. Like what kind of music do you listen to? Blah, blah, blah. We hit it off.
Sick.
And that first, like, I think it was like you did like 2 or 3 day stints. And I fucking slayed.
Hell yeah.
This was like early 2000s. This is when like girls were wearing like cowboy boots, velvet blazers. But my Snap, and I was selling that stuff too. I wouldn't just bring Snap. I would bring vintage. belts, like those elastic belts with the butterfly clips and shit. Like it was all that shit. But man, I slayed. You know, it was like at the end of that, like those 2-3 days, I'd be like, to my ex, I'd be like, we're going to Red Lobster and everything is fucking killer. And I'm walking home with like big pocket of cash.
That's how you know you made it, eh?
This
You're
is
taking your girl to Red Lobster.
Yeah. Well, when you're in your 20s, you know what I mean? And you do the all you can eat crab, like
Biscuits are on me, baby.
Alaskan king crab legs or whatever the fuck it was. I don't know. I don't eat Red Lobster anymore, by the way, but I'm not opposed to it.
Shout out Red Lobster.
Yeah, shout out Red Lobster.
That's sick, man. I mean, I love that because, like, I think such a big thing in the vintage game today, especially with, like, COVID and everything, everybody's kind of switched to pop-ups. And you were doing pop-ups long before pop-ups were a thing.
Absolutely.
That's awesome, man. So everything's coming up great for you right now. You've done the show at Guelph U. You're making the moves. We're still, are we getting to the F as in Frank era here?
We're getting there. So
it's quite the story.
it is quite the story. There's a lot of pieces to the puzzle. So that was an eye opener. My first thing at Guelph, and I timed it perfectly because because it was at Christmas that I made this discovery, or my sister kind of like, you know, brought this to my attention. I was like, oh, I'm definitely going to give this a shot. So I went and I killed it. And then I was like, well, now I'm getting retail for all this stuff. Like I'm wholesaling, and I'm doing online. So I'm doing retail via the web, but I don't have any brick and mortar stores at this point in time. And so I decided, well, if this works at Guelph, why can't this work at McMaster? Why can't this work at U of T? Why can't this work at York? Why can't this work at Waterloo? So I started doing the whole university circuit, all the way to Western. I think I went out to Queens, maybe even in London, in Kingston. And so I started doing the circuit, and I did it for a few years. I figured out that the best time to do it was Frosh Week, because all the kids had their money. You know, their parents send them away to school. They all got dollars. And then I would do it after Christmas, because they would all come back from Christmas with money.
Stocked up, yep.
So I started doing that circuit, and that was great. It was just great money. It was great fun interacting with people. I was getting long margins because I'm buying it out the rag yard, and I'm getting full hilt retail. And it was just a lot of fun for me, you know. It was just a lot of fun. I had my business set up in a way that, like, it didn't need to be micromanaged. My pickers knew what they were doing. My eBay and online situation was like pretty sorted. So I had the freedom to be like, okay, guys, like I'm taking off for 4 days. I'm going to go do like this university event. And I did a circuit for like a few years, and that evolved it. So then, but that ended at the school year, right? There was like a few times during the year that it hit. It was like Frosh Week, after the holidays, and then after spring break. But then summertime came, and it was like, oh, all that, you know, that revenue stream dried up until I started realizing this is translatable to music festivals and to other festivals. So this is at the time when, I don't know if you guys remember this, I don't even know how old you are, but in the early mid-2000s, Virgin Records started something in Toronto called Virgin Fest. And so I was on board with Virgin Fest right from its inception, because they had vendors, they had a vendor area. So I would go to Virgin Fest and set up a booth selling Snap, my reconstructed line, and selling vintage. And at that point in time, one of my pickers was a guy named Richard Zahumensky, which I haven't seen in a long time. Shout out, Rich, if you hear this. Hope you're well. He had worked for Black Market for years. He was versed in vintage, and we were both Jewish guys. We just got along, and so he came to work for me. And so he would also work for me like on weekends and stuff if I had local events, because he was a Toronto guy. I didn't drive. So he would do the Virgin Fest with me and any other like little things. Like I even did shit like Pride Fest. Like I did our whole reconstructed line based around the Pride flag. So we were taking like the rainbow of colors of t-shirts and sweats and making reconstructed garments in the vein of the gay flag, right?
That's so groundbreaking to me to hear that.
Yeah, so like we were doing, I was doing like anything and anything I could do. It was everything and anything. It was like, is there a lane here? Yeah, let's set up here. Let's do this. So one Virgin Fest I'm doing on Toronto Island with Richard, and this young guy comes in and he's all dressed to the nines, like all hip-hopped out, looking like he could be the white member of Dipset, basically. And that person was Josh Roeder from In Vintage We Trust.
Still dresses the exact same.
Yeah, little. I mean, I'm not friends with him anymore, but you know, I'll see stuff about him like on the interweb and whatever, and. Yeah, I mean, I think he's elevated in style to match his age now, but he's still definitely flamboyant and definitely a stylish guy and a very knowledgeable person with respect to fashion and culture. Although he had never worked in vintage before, but I met him because he used to shop at Black Market. So Richard, who was working with me and my employee at Virgin Fest, knew Josh. And I was there wearing a Troop LL Cool J jacket and a Run DMC Houdini t-shirt from the 80s because that's the shit that I grew up with, okay? Nobody was doing that stuff at the time. But the thing is, get this. Like, I was born in 78. I'm 43. Majority of my youth was spent in the late 80s and the 90s, okay? I grew up skateboarding. I was around for the inception of hip-hop and gravitated towards that. I was really much into urban life because I was born in Toronto, had tons of friends in Toronto, although I lived in Niagara-on-the-Lake. But I would come to the city all the time with my folks there because they had all their friend base was in Toronto. Even going back further, just to like give you a little bit more precedent, my dad's stores in Toronto, like my dad was a free thinker, hippie, always was, entrepreneur, Jewish guy, like totally open, like culturally to all races, sexual orientations, cultural, whatever you were in, what kind of culture you're in. So his employee base growing up, and I'm a little kid, like I'm talking 6, 7, 8 years old. I'll go into his stores and there would be like, like a very flamboyant gay guy working the counter. There would be a punk rocker working the floor with a pink mohawk.
I don't think people even quite take in how out of the way that was at the time.
At the time it was. Yeah, at the time it was very out of the way. At the time it wasn't the norm. But that my dad embraced that shit because his work, well, first of all, he was that guy. You know,
it wasn't a 9-to-5 office job. Like it was something he was doing something kind of out of the way too, right?
He was doing something out of the way, and he gravitated to people that were doing interesting things, and his customer base was those people too. So it's like he had punk rockers, he had mods, he had hot rod guys, he had the gay and lesbian community coming in, he had everyone and anyone buying his stuff, and for him it was like, he got along with all those people because he's not a borders guy, like that's what he grew up in the hippie culture of freedom, free to express yourself, be yourself, do your thing, no holds barred, live your life. So I grew up around that, like diverse cultural and sexual, like demographic of like, everyone and anyone was like family. And I didn't see borders really like that growing up. You know what I mean? Black, white, Asian, whatever. It was just all one thing, which was very the opposite of the place that I lived, Niagara-on-the-Lake, which was a very down home, white bread. I mentioned Trailer Park Boys to you earlier before we started recording, but it's like I grew up with a lot of those kind of people, right? So, but I was a skateboarder. I was into rave music and hip hop. And the kids that I was going to high school with were like, you're kind of different.
It must have been completely a different.
It was.
It was because you guys had a background in different cities and had seen all these people and been around it.
Yeah.
And then these guys were just country kids.
Yeah, and we were well traveled too. Like my parents took us to all kinds of places. Like my grandparents lived in Florida. You know, my dad would take us to all over the world, and I mean not all over the world, but you know, we'd go to Europe once in a while. We'd go to all over the States. We'd see all kinds of people, and so I was accustomed to that kind of stuff. And yeah, I'll admit, like there was a defining moment in my youth where my desire to be accepted by my peers and my friends, who are all listening to Metallica and metal and stuff like that. And I appreciate some of that stuff, don't get me wrong, but it never felt right to me. And all that while, I still maintained like a fairly significant friend group in Toronto because I lived here till I was 6. And a lot of those friends I still maintain friendships with beyond that, because a lot of my parents' friends were their parents' friends too, right? So I was exposed to that. So I'd come to Toronto, I'd see all this stuff in my dad's shops. I'd also go hang out with my friends like Benji Bacall and Thornhill and like his buddies that were these two twins that were like, this is like this is like late 80s, early 90s when like Ewing shoes just came out on Next. And I remember going to, I remember getting my first pair of Ewings. My brother got a pair too. And I remember going to, what the hell was that retailer here? There was a retailer that was in all the malls, and they carried like cross colors. Stitches, yeah. So I would go to
Stitches was my shit
So
growing up.
So I'll go to Stitches in St. Catharines at the Penn Center. And I remember going and get a Major Damage short set, which was like a short sleeve button up in like gray and purple and charcoal, and the matching shorts, which were like big baggy ass shorts, which matched my purple and gray Ewings. And I remember it was like, this was after a summer. So it was like the first week back to school, and I showed up in all that stuff. And people were like, what the fuck? And I got all the like Wigger and all that shit. And it was, and on top of which, I was the only Jewish kid in my high school. So, you know, it was a bit of an uphill battle. I'm not gonna like, it's not a sob story, but it was definitely like, I was different. You know what I mean? And so over that time, like there was something like skateboarding is something that I had in common with a lot of those friends, even though they were still listening to Black Flag and Butthole Surfers and all that, which was like, I got with some of that stuff, but it wasn't like, I liked it, but it wasn't like, didn't speak to me like
naturally.
hip-hop. Yeah. And the other things that I was listening to, like techno at the time, you know, which is a very broad statement. But you know, so I knew like I was different and I like had different things. And I think at that point I had enough self-confidence to be like, well, you like it or you don't, I'm here and I can take your little Wigger comments and it's not going to like keep me up at night. I'm not going to go back to like pretending I like what you guys all like, because this is actually what I like.
That's it's easy to say that. That's a brave thing to do as a young man. It's hard not to fall into the mold. And I remember my first day of high school, I got made fun of for wearing an and1 camouflage trim jersey. I called the W word.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know what we're allowed to say now.
Yeah.
But it's crazy, right? Like, and it is. It's like you got to embrace the things you love, man. That's something I definitely respect.
And I think that's what it was. It was just like, what means more to me? The things that speak to me, the passion for the music and the style and like urban culture, or like being accepted by these, like my peers that like a lot of them aren't really doing shit and a lot of them are kind of assholes anyways. So it's like, no, I'm like cool to do my own thing. So that definitely like segmented, like, you know, there's definitely like some friendships that dissolved because of that. But like a lot of my mainstay friendships, like were accepting of like my thing that I wanted to do. Ended up hanging out actually with a lot of girls because they were a lot more accepting. And how that kind of like this is kind of more going into my social life, but it does have bearing on the whole spectrum of it all. The closest city to where we lived in Niagara-on-the-Lake was St. Catharines. This is the early 90s. We're like 92, 93. And these guys were older than me because they were dating a lot of the girls that were in my grade. But like somehow they had all like these like the girls that I was friends with that I grew up with had like started branching out and like going to parties in the city, which is St. Catharines, right? And then so those guys would sometimes come into town, you know what I mean? And then, you know, just one thing leads to another, and I end up meeting all these guys, and like those guys are my best friends now and have been since then. Like my best friend Richie Bennett in Kelowna. Shout out Rich, love you, bro. And then like few of my other guys like Phil Williams, who was like probably one of my first really close black friends, you know, of Jamaican descent. His parents moved from England, well, from Jamaica to England and England to Canada. And so then they, vis-a-vis that, like all those new relationships, these guys were forward thinking. They were going to the city a lot too. Toronto, I mean, from St. Catharines, and bringing back music and stuff that we couldn't get. Like a lot of the rave shit, like the jungle, the drum and bass, it was just called jungle back then. Breakbeat stuff, like hardcore, like really niche musics from around the world that like really gravitated to, like, I was like, this is my thing, you know what I mean? So, I mean, that's kind of like that's just a little bit more background on like how I came to be as like a unique individual with my own sense of fashion, style, and culture. And the same thing goes for my brother, because he was privy to all that as well. We were skateboarders, we were snowboarders, we were into music, we were into fashion. I remember coming up to Toronto to go, like, it was a big deal to like get someone's parents to drive us to Toronto for a day.
Of course.
So we could go to like Noise on Queen Street and get like Fresh Drive stuff and get drawers, like the original drawer stuff. And like all that kind of like really cool, interesting gat, you know, like Gypsies and Thieves. Like this is stuff, the kind of clothing we were wearing, fucked, you know? And I remember like going to school and like my brother and his buddies, like all of us, like, because we, at this point, it kind of became a movement amongst a small group of us there. We're skaters, but we're like, yeah, we're separating ourselves from like the other cool guys in school. Like we're doing our own thing, and they can call us skater, loser, fucking whatever. It doesn't matter because we have our own clique, right? And going to school wearing fuck shirts and the teacher's making you flip them inside out.
Hell yeah.
Right? It's like the Ford logo, but fucked, you know? And hence that, you know, like I was introduced to the rave scene, and that became my life, and like electronic music, and just like trying to wrap my head around like, how the fuck is this even made? Like there's no guitar in this. I live in the country, man. So it's like, there's no guitar and drums in this. How is this music even made?
Well, it's not common. You couldn't just jump on YouTube and search a producer video or something, right? And like get behind it. Like I totally get that.
Yeah, but back then we didn't have that.
Exactly. That's what I mean. Like, yeah. There's all.
It was like trying to figure it all out. So I was doing the schools at the shows. At the time too, they had this thing called the Old Clothing Show. Have you ever heard of the Old Clothing Show? Yeah.
It still runs, right?
Yeah, it does. Somebody kind of,
it's different. Yeah,
it's totally different. It's way smaller. To give you perspective, the Old Clothing Show in its heyday used to fill the automotive building, completely fill it. Thousands of people. It was a Saturday, Sunday event. Thousands of people would show up. And like, you know, this is going way back, and this is not a gloat thing. This is to give you perspective. There were clothing shows I'd do 20, 30 grand. You know, like these were big fucking shows. Everybody and their uncle was there. Flashback was there. Exile was there. All Shoney was there. 69 Vintage was there. There were not, this is before Instagram and online selling. So you didn't have like guys that were like, oh, I'm so-and-so on Instagram, or I'm so-and-so on eBay, but I'm setting up here. No, these are like all people had stores. That's how many vintage stores there were in Toronto at that time. And Yeah, so that was an incredible show. But to get into the SnapBack thing, I was doing a Virgin Fest and working with my employee Richard Zahumansky, who's also my friend. And this guy, like I said, this guy comes walking in looking like he could be the white Dipset member, like all dressed to the nines with the bandanas and the flare and the hat sitting high and everything. And he's like, yo, you got a troop jacket on? He was younger than me. And he's like, you got a troop jacket on? What, yo, your shirt? LL Cool J, Houdini? You know, like, what the fuck? Like 86 tour or something. And I'm like, yeah, man, like, this is my shit. Like, I do all this, but like, this is my passion. And I was wearing like OG Air Force 2 highs, you know, like, it was just like, that's what I was into. And I was able to acquire it because I'm out. At this point, I think I might have even been doing the bowl. Yeah, I was doing the bowl. So I'm out at the bowl being able to find this stuff for pennies because nobody's in on it.
That's what I wanted to ask. You're grabbing this because it's a passion project. Let's say it's your stuff. It's what you care about. It's what you care about.
Yeah.
But it's not. You're not resell. It's not to resell. It's not.
Not initially.
Not because you're going to make money off of it. You're just grabbing it because this is sick. I love Starter. I love LL Cool J.
Yeah. I remember when I got my first Starter jacket. Like, me and Drew grew up in Niagara Lake, right across the river. Growing up, we called it cross the river, but it's the States. When we grew up, you could cross the border with it. My mom would cross with a driver's license and no ID for any of the kids.
Me and a buddy were talking about this the other day. He went across the border with a note his mom wrote.
Yeah,
saying, hey, he's not kidnapped.
Yeah,
it's all good.
No, and we would go with my mom and even friends, and they wouldn't even ask for a letter for the friends. They would just show my mom's driver's license. She'd go, we're going to Tops. That's like our Loblaws, right? She'd be like, we're going grocery shopping at Tops because at that time, the dollar and the discount made it so it was cheaper to do your grocery shopping there. And then not to mention the fact that we would go to the outlet mall on Military Road where they had Ralph Lauren, they had Tommy, they had Nautica, and they had one sports store. So we always hit the Polo outlet. We always hit the Tommy and Nautica outlet. And I'll say this straight up. This is for all the low heads and everybody that's potentially going to watch this. I didn't know about low in the sense that you all did. I didn't know about 92 or what was Snow Beach or what was hot. It was just a brand, and I heard it on hip-hop music. Polo, you heard Nautica, you heard Tommy. So I'm like, I want that. So I'll pick out shit that like just spoke to me, that was cool. And in my high school days, it didn't matter. If you were wearing a fresh Polo shirt, girls were like, yo, he's wearing Polo. He's doing all right. Yeah, he's doing all right. Look at that sick Tommy shirt. It was cool. It wasn't to the level of it was in New York where it's like, oh, you don't have a Snow Beach or you don't have a cookie jacket or whatever it is. There wasn't pieces per se where in our culture here. And a funny segue to that is that in 92, when they did the 92 Bear knits Polo, my mom bought me and my brother each one for Christmas. And we were both like, fuck.
No.
Yeah, because we're like, look, we're like 92, I was 14.
And it was preppy, like.
And I was like, I'm not wearing a teddy bear sweater, Mom. I'm like, I'm trying to be hard here.
This is insane for anybody who knows what kind of a Polo collection you're rocking with now.
Yeah.
To think you did not want to rock the teddy bear.
Yeah. And I mean, I did wear it, but the things I would wear it to would be like, oh, we're going to Christmas dinner.
Picture day.
Yeah. She'd be like, we're going to Christmas dinner at your aunt's. And I'm like, okay, I'll wear the fucking
stupid sweater.
Yeah, I'll wear the fucking teddy bear sweater. But that's just me being real. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't a thing for me then.
I appreciate that about you, man. The fact that you're not like, I've always been rocking. I know everything about every piece.
No, I don't, and I never did.
I think a lot of guys, like even younger guys younger than me in that, have trouble being admitting they don't know everything about the vintage game.
Yeah,
and like you're the man for Polo. And to hear you say that, that's a wild thing to hear. That's a hilarious story, by the way.
Yeah, well, it is hilarious. But I mean, I
how many bears do you think you have now?
To be honest with you, I've never had a huge affinity towards bears. I have some rare bears, and I have some, but it's not one of the things that I like desire or like look to collect. But I would just buy things that I like. Like I bought this great Nautica cream down-filled parka with the forest green inside and the coyote fur hood. You know what I mean? Like around the hood and funny story there. Like I bought it on the way to a Bills game. Me and my mom stopped at the outlet mall, and we were going to meet my dad for the Bills game because my dad had season tickets for the Bills game. My dad was a big Bills fan, and we went to the game. We came out after the game, and somebody did a smash and grab and took my jacket, which I got back, and then I ended up giving it to my friend Peter in like the early 2000s because I kept that jacket forever. It was so warm. I ended up giving it to him, and I picked one, and I have it again. The exact one, exact color, and I'll never let that
good
one
karma.
go. Yeah, good karma.
Love it.
But yeah. Anyways, sorry. I know we're jumping around a lot, but
it's a lot. It's a lot to.
Yeah,
It's
a lot.
It's not a quick story. Like
No, it's not. It's almost like I got to write it down and like
we need the book.
Organize it. The book will come. The book will come when I can cash out and settle down and like sit in Montana with like a real writer. The book will come out.
There's a couple chapters still to write.
Yeah,
but it's coming.
Lots of chapters still to write. So anyways, going back to the Virgin Fest, that's where I met Josh Roeder because he used to buy a lot, even though like he never worked or like, you know, had deep knowledge of vintage clothing, but he was a real sports fanatic. So he would go to Black Market and buy jerseys. And Richard, who worked for me, worked for Black Market prior to working for me. So Richard knew Josh. He's like, oh, this is Josh. So Josh came in the booth. He's like, oh, Richard introduced us. It's Josh. Josh was hype. You know, wow, troop jacket and your kicks and your shirt. And
there's not a ton of you guys out there at this point.
No, there's none.
So so he must have been psyched meeting somebody like-minded.
Yeah, there's a few, and those few are like old head. They were old heads at that time, like Damon from Lounge. Shout out Damon, love you. Another tribe member. You know, there's a few guys that kind of got it and understood it. You know, like Harris, who did what was that big? There was a hip hop newspaper in Toronto. Oh, it might have been Peace Magazine actually, or one of those things. But anyways, Harris, like he's an OG. He knew all about all that shit. I mean, Toronto has a history in that stuff. Like TBG, two black guys started in Toronto. You know, and like they were that TBG. That clothing was started by two guys in Toronto. Two black guys' clothing was worn in some very, very critical hip-hop music videos. American music videos by American rappers, right? So it had cred. It had credibility. And so I'm not trying to, like, I don't want to discount Toronto's influence on urban fashion culture. There's definitely history there, but it wasn't commonplace. It certainly wasn't commonplace. It didn't permeate the general like fashion culture. It's certainly not the vintage fashion culture at that point in time. I remember getting my first starter jacket at that outlet mall, and I was in grade 8. And me, my best friend at the time, Todd, who I'm still good friends with, I'm going to his Christmas party next week in Burlington. One of my best friends at the time, Neil Cooper, who lives in London, England now. His mom took us over to the outlet mall. And we went to Kmart, which was next door, and bought baseball cards because they always had them on discount. You could buy the case. You could buy the box, you know what I mean, for like $15 or $10. And I still have tons of that shit, by the way. And then we went to the sports store, and we had all saved our money, and we're like, "Yo, we all got to buy fucking starter jackets. Like we're like a clique here." And I got an Atlanta Hawks.
Love it.
I remember I got the Atlanta Hawks. I can't remember what they got, but they were all basketball ones, you know. And like I'll never forget that. That was like wearing like a battle worn uniform if you were like a vet. That was just like, yo, I got my first starter jacket. This is like,
Did you know when he threw it on that was you're moving the streetwear and is that
well, it was part and parcel with the whole urban thing that we were all rocking with at that time. It's just that it wasn't as easy, and it was certainly less expensive to get it in the States at that time. So that's why we did that. And there were very few guys, if any, in stockists in St. Catharines for starter brand.
Sure.
Right? There just wasn't. Like, you'd probably have to go to Toronto. So I remember that, and so that shit, like, that's the stuff. I guess why I'm bringing all this up is because that's the stuff that I grew up with. I don't have to learn that stuff. Like, I have to learn things now again. And I had to learn things in the beginning. And I always learn, actually. I'll actually scratch that. I'm always learning.
Definitely.
Because there's one of the things I could tell to anybody in vintage, if you're new, old, thinking about getting into it, got out of it, you all know that this statement reigns true. Nobody on the planet knows everything about 100%. Vintage clothing. There's always something new to learn, and that is one of the most desirable, unique, attractive things about being involved in this industry, for me, is the endless amount of knowledge and that you can never top out.
Man, the difference between like me talking about a wrestling t-shirt to another guy talking about an anime t-shirt who just knows them inside. Like I like Dragon Ball Z. Mm-hmm. I don't know about independent Japanese animes that like the tees go for $1,000.
Yeah.
But I can tell you like a Mankind shirt's cool.
Sure.
So it's like everybody knows their own slivers, man. And like you're right. It's like vintage it's not one or two things. It's subgenres on subgenres
on subgenres, and they keep dividing out more and more and more. Case in point, like talking about just like what you said with anime, like I'm not a huge anime fan, but I was a comic book collector in the 80s and 90s.
Sure.
And there was one of the first big anime comics, Japanese anime comics, to get a licensing agreement in North America was a story or line or a book called Fist of the North Star. Which ended up being a PS2 game, and they ended up making a movie about it way later. But I have all the originals, black and white. And I got those in the 80s. And, it's like, further to your point, it's like, I don't know everything about anime, but I know about that shit. You know what
Something
I mean?
you rocked with.
Something I rock with. And I think we all have those things, right? Yes. Like, we all have some particular thing that we gravitate towards. And it's funny enough, I actually found a Fist of the North Face t-shirt at the Bowl a couple months ago because I didn't go last month. But unfortunately, the guy wanted like $1,500 for it.
Yeah.
And I'm just I'm not in that realm. So anyways, let's get back to this story. So SnapBack lineage. So Josh comes into the booth. We hit it off. We exchanged contact information. I had tickets to, I believe it was a Rakim concert at the Phoenix for like 2 weeks later with Marco Polo opening up with DJ set.
Legendary Canadian.
Yeah. And
Rakim at the Phoenix too is just wild to think about.
Rakim at the Phoenix with Marco Polo opening up. And I'm like, I got tickets. Do you want to go? Because I think I was like planning on bringing my wife at the time. And, oh no, it would have been my ex-girlfriend at the time. Sorry, babe. And I knew she wasn't like in it like I was in it. So I was like, yo, you want to go? And he was like, hell yeah, I want to go. So we went. And I dressed as I dress always. I had another different kind of crazy troop jacket on with some other crazy hip hop shirt, with some other crazy Nike sneaks, and some raw denim Lee jeans or whatever it was. I don't know exactly, but it was some shit. And he always dressed up too. And we went and we ended up kicking it all night. And at the time, he had been working in the fashion industry. I think he went to school for fashion or fashion marketing or some shit. But he was stuck kind of in this dead end job working for Edwin Jeans at the time, and was having a hard time getting paid from what he had explained to me. And was kind of getting pulled left, right, and center, having to do all these shitty trade shows in Quebec and wherever, Las Vegas and whatever. And he just wasn't into it. You know what I mean? Like, he was into fashion, and I could sense he was trying to be into it, trying to convey that he was into it. But you knew in his heart he wasn't into it, you know? And he was also a sneaker collector. And I've never been a sneaker collector. And I just want to put that out there for everyone. I'm not a sneaker guy. Here's a thing that I don't share often, but it's a unique, an interesting tidbit of information about myself. I have never personally owned a personal pair of Air Jordans.
Crazy.
I've owned 100, maybe hundreds of pairs of Jordans that I bought and sold, but I have never in my life bought a pair of Jordans for myself.
That's a little mind blowing, man. Not
Yeah.
even like back in those early.
Nope.
Really.
I was a Agassi,
Hell yeah.
Bo Jackson, Air Max, Ewing, Puma, Suede Puma, Gazelles, Shell Toes. That was my lane.
Love it.
That was my shit. And then skate shoes, because naturally it's like, if I wasn't raving, and when I was raving, I was in like a pair of Gazelles that likely matched my tracksuit, or a pair of like Pumas that matched my suede Pumas that matched my tracksuit. But when I was out skating, I was wearing skateboard shoes. I had Airwalks when they first came out. I had Vision streetwear shoes, but I never ever have owned a pair of Michael Jordan Air Jordan shoes.
Well, that's an exclusive for the podcast.
Yeah.
It's on record now.
Yeah. So Josh knew that world, right?
Yeah.
And he also knew fashion. He was just he like, we've had our ups and downs, and we've had our falling outs, but again, like, I don't hold any animosity. Like, I'm a grown man, and I will say that Josh Roeder is he's a modern day historian, and he's a walking Wikipedia in a lot of regards. He retains information. He's never been a drinker, never been a weed smoker. His high is information, and it always was. And I recognize that from day one. And we hit it off from day one. Not on some like, oh, I want to do something with you because you have something to offer me, or I have something to offer you. No, we genuinely hit it off like we had a friendship. We were very good friends for a very long time. So he approached me. I think this is how it went. I'm just going on my vague memory of it. He approached me at one point basically and was like, look, I want to be out of Edwin. I really want to work in vintage. So I hired him. And I hired him to pick. I taught him how to pick, and I taught him about true vintage. And I taught him how to deal with the rag dealers and so on and so forth. And he was a great picker for years for me. He fucking killed it. And then we went on, and that's not all he was with me. So then, because he came to my house and saw my collection, my personal collection that was not for sale. This was my shit. It was all like OG Jordan stuff, Troop stuff, hip hop stuff, cross colors things, starter jackets, anything and everything that related to my youth that like had some nostalgic attraction for me. That's what I had, and he's seen all that and was like, wow, this is fucking crazy. And then, obviously I went and, we hung out, and I went to his place and seen his collection. He had, crazy amounts of sneakers, and he had some of the clothes, like he had like maybe some starter jackets, or I don't even remember, but he had some cool shit. So it was like, yeah, like we're on that level. And he was like, yeah. So I'm like, you should start work, like he wanted to work for me. I'm like, yeah, here, I'll give you a job picking. He started picking for me. And through conversation and through our daily interactions, we decided to, because I had to amass this collection. Especially after he started working for me, because he when I was out picking, I was buying all that stuff. But my other pickers weren't, they didn't know it like we did.
And you guys are on the exact same.
We're on the same level. So they were picking it when they could, when they knew.
If it was something you exactly said to grab.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When it was in their realm, they figured it out and they grabbed it for us. But Josh knew.
He's finding all the.
So he was finding all of that. And then I'm out ragging too.
And that stuff wasn't picked over at all, right? Like that's the stuff people were throwing back at the time.
Tons of it. Nobody knew polo. I'll be like, mind you, during this time, and pretty much during my whole career, I've been hitting rag houses, and I've always been in rag houses, but I always buy from independent dealers as well to supplement my buying. So I'll get guys on things, I'll be like, hey, yo, Simon, I'll take every starter jacket. He's like, oh, I see those. I don't buy them. Buy them for me. I remember going to
a guy who just does military surplus or whatever. You tell him, hey, when you see starter jackets, grab them. I'll buy them for you.
Exactly. If you see Nike shirts, like this is back then when there were no not all the massive all the new stuff, but it was like Nike track jackets, buy them. Nike windbreakers, buy them. Any Air Jordan stuff, buy it. Any of these weird Michael Hoban leather jackets, buy them, any Jeff Hamilton jackets, buy them. Like whatever it was, right? Just buy it. Sports stuff, Raiders, Bulls, Raptors, blah, 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 blah. Buy it all. Whatever it is, I'll buy it. It was prevalent. And I put a lot of people onto it. I don't know if you know Manji, Salim Manji. He's a wholesaler. I've known him for 25 years. He's another one that I put onto all that stuff. It was I used to buy from him just for our stores, just regular goods. And I'd be like, yo, can you buy starter jackets? What starter jackets? Here's one. Oh, yeah, I see those. I'll buy them. Okay, great. I'm like, do you have polo? He's like, yeah, there's the polo. So I'd go through the polo and I'd pull pieces and I'd say, yo, anything with any big graphics, any big emblems, anything multicolor, anything that says 92, anything, pull it for me. I'll give you some more money for it.
This is almost going back to how you not got put on, but how you learned the game while you were selling stuff for wholesale at whatever $5 a piece, and then you started realizing this one's a 50, this one's a 60. This is what you're spreading the knowledge now.
Yeah, exactly. So I had done the knowledge. You know what I mean? I had figured it all out. Now this stuff. We were carving our own lane because there was no precedent. There was no base price. There was no, look, completed listings up on eBay for
comps,
Public Enemy T-shirt, right?
Real quick, where are we right now? Approximately.
Yeah,
circa.
we're approximately 2004, 2005, roughly.
Sure.
That's just ballparking it, okay? And so we're spreading it out to everyone because we want to start really getting it, and now we're collecting it, not really with a direct and clear mission, but we're just it's out there, we're buying it for cheap.
We want
as
it,
fuck,
and it's sick.
We want it, it's sick, and I know consciously and subconsciously that this industry works on a 20-year cycle. We're coming up on this.
Yeah.
Plus, we're in one of the biggest cities in North America, the fourth biggest, to be factual. This is going to hit. And I want to be on the forefront of this because this is me. Not this shit speaks to me. This is what I grew up wearing. There is a direct connection. As opposed to me selling an all over print tattoo Aussie shirt, between you and me and everyone who's listening, I don't give a fuck about that shirt. I don't care. Do I know it's worth money? Yes. And am I going to try to get top dollar for it? Yes. But it doesn't speak to me, So there's a distinction to be made there. And I'd like to just take a second to make that distinction. I did what I did because I loved it and because I had a direct connection to it. Passionate direction. It spoke to me. It was nostalgic to me because it's what I loved, and it represented not just the brand, but a time and a place and a culture that I grew up in that is unique and will never happen again. So for kids that are out there, like that are, 25 years old, freaking over that Ozzy Osbourne tattoo shirt, like, good for you. And like, if you really love it, you love it. But maybe take a second and look inward and ask yourself, do you love the shirt, or do you love the shirt because of the value of the shirt? Because there's a distinction there. Dollars doesn't mean passion. And if it does, then great, you're money driven. That's what drives you. But I implore you to look for things that actually mean something to you beyond like a fiscal, like financial
1,000%.
end. Okay. Because those are the things that will open doors for you, and you will see that you'll have more passion and joy and self-fulfillment in your work if you're doing things that really speak to your soul rather than speaking to your wallet.
Love that.
Sorry to go on that little.
No, not at all, man.
sidebar
Even just to give you a little story back. We did me and my business partner Mike. We did a little interview with just another vintage page the other day, and they were kind of asking like, what do you guys think is like the secret to success, or like what's helped you guys out? And that was I said, like, you don't get burned jumping trend to trend. If you stick to what's like in your heart and what stuff that you think is cool, that's all we try to pack the store up with. Is stuff that shit we find cool, man. And like,
Yeah.
and I think that's like, you can tell when a page is just trying to jump from trend to trend, get in on whatever's hot, and if they have a passion for something.
Yeah.
And like, that's like, not just saying this because you're here or whatever, man. That's something I really do respect about you and the business. I think that's a big reason you guys have had the longevity you've had. And
Thanks, man. And it's been interesting too, just to expand on that, because, I think we were one of the first people, if not the first people, really doing that. We were, and I've heard 100 people tell me that, that have no reason to tell me that, except to say you were the first ones. Back in 2006, I was on your website. Like, that was the Bible for me. You know what I mean? That was fucking where I learned the ropes. I used you as a price guide. I used you as a thing. I used you to see what I should be looking for. And kudos to all you that have ever said that to me. It will, it means the world to me. And it's humbling to me to know that me and my brother, because we are 50-50 through and through, and we're best fucking friends.
hell yeah.
But that we have done something that has inspired and touched so many people is worth all the money in the world to me, man.
That's incredible, man. I love that.
So, but, we've had to move and shake with the trends too.
Yep.
And so I don't want, like, as much as I've said, do what's passionate to you, but if you're also in this for business, you don't get stuck in pigeon. I know this is kind of double talk, but don't look at it that way. You have to stick to your guns and stick to your roots, and feel free to say what you really love and be true and be honest. But it doesn't mean you can't sell a fucking Aladdin shirt, even though you're not rocking with Aladdin or Lion King, because that's what's selling right now. And I'm in business. This is my business. It's passionate, and I'm passionate about my business, and it's a passion for me. There's like incredibly deep nostalgic roots that permeate my fucking deepest soul when it comes to vintage clothing and what I've done over the years. But you also have to be willing to move and bend with the trends, because I know old heads, and many of them I'm friends with, and I love them, but they look down on certain things that me and Drew do, because they're like, yo, why are you guys doing these videos? They're corny. All the old heads are talking, and it looks like you guys are trying so hard to relate to the younger crowds. And why are you guys selling fucking, these Disney things or these Pokemon things and blah, blah, blah. Bro, it's a business.
Yeah.
We have 55 employees, give or take, at any given time. Our monthly nut probably costs, a quarter to the half of what your house costs to cover our monthly nut.
Yep.
So understand that we love and are passionate and are true to what we do, but we also have to run a business, and we have 55 mouths to feed and rents to pay and government things to pay, and we have to pay for benefits for our employees because we are one of the only, if not the only, vintage clothing company out there to provide full medical and dental and health benefits to every single staff member.
Incredible.
Because we are an inclusive company that looks after our staff, we're an incubator that wants our staff to grow and to go out and to do great things, whether it's with us or on their own or with someone else. So, just touching on that thing, like, I am passionate about what I do and I love what I do, and I still wear shit that I love. Shout out Rob Way.
Hell yeah.
On this joint. I'm still passionate about what I do. I still love the clothes, but that doesn't mean I can't sell something. Like, I still will sell anything I can make a buck on.
I mean, at the end of the day, you got to keep the doors open.
Man, that's it. Like, I have wholesale customers that buy contemporary shit clothing. And why? Because I have pickers there. Why would I pay somebody a very fair, livable wage plus benefits that's working to just look for this shirt if they see a great contemporary dress that I know another client wants and I can make $5 off it? No, we're a business. We're entrepreneurs. So it's a wide, broad spectrum that touches a lot of bases.
Yeah, and I don't mean like you should only follow and sell things you like.
No, and I didn't take it like
no, of
that,
course.
yeah.
But like, I mean, there's got to be passionate. But that's a great point, man. And there is a balance, of course, between what you love and what people dig. And I think probably what I should have said was not to lean too far either way.
Yeah,
'cause you don't want to just jump trend to trend and only sell what's hot.
Yeah,
and then get burned with a bunch of stuff.
Yeah,
and then you don't want to only. But I only sell 80s Metallica. Like,
yeah.
Not everybody's going to love that.
Yeah, totally. And that wasn't trying to take anything away from what you're saying. It was just to give some more perspective on it. And then I think, just like a little quick thing on top of that, if you are in this strictly for passion, because I know there are guys out there, I meet them, that are strictly in this for passion, that like are really they're in their lane and that's what they want to do. Then if that's what you want to do, then stick to it, dude.
I'm not awesome telling. To see sometimes.
I'm not. Yeah, and it is awesome to see sometimes. Like, there's certain people that I know that are just like so hard into their certain specific thing, and they know it inside out, and they aren't money driven. They're strictly in it for the passion. As long as they can make a living and like live a comfortable life, they don't want to skew. They don't want to stray. That do you. That's all you. And I'm not looking down on that, but. If you are in this to make the biggest go and to make the biggest run for business and see as far as you could take this thing, then don't put yourself in a box. Because if you would have asked me 20 years ago if I'd be selling juicy velour pants, I'd have probably told you go fuck yourself. And right now, I'll take every pair I can get.
Hell yeah.
So it is what it is.
I love it.
But let's get back on the SnapBack lineage.
Definitely. One quick thing I just wanted to say that you touched on in there. Anybody who's tuning in that wanted like advice for selling like your rap tees for the max, whatever, that's all cool. The thing that you said there about having 55 employees, you guys give them benefits, you give them that should be everybody's goal, and that should be the top. That's the top of the pyramid, man. I think that stuff like that's incredible. And
thanks,
shout out to you guys, man. Like that's a next level from selling tees to at a high price, like. Yeah. I mean, it's cool to see people get in the game doing that.
It is.
That's a whole new. That's a grown man goal right there, and like that's the sort of stuff I really respect.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that a lot. I really do, sincerely. There's so many different people in this game, and everyone has their own angle. And I know lots of people that are like kind of one man shows that don't have a lot of overhead, and they're willing and able to go to events like Virtual, ThriftCon, Deadstock Depot, Rose Bowl. They're willing to buy a shirt for $1,200 on the chance that they can sell it for $15 on a live. That's never been our game, because the thing is, our business strictly from a business planning, like deep diving into like real corporate business. We are a corporation. You have to be doing forecasting, planning, and things like that. We don't have the means. Well, we do have the financial means to go out and buy a $1,200 shirt and see if we can get $1,500 for it. But it doesn't make sense in our business model, because for that $1,200, I can buy so much other stuff, and I don't like, my risk tolerance is way higher, or is it way lower? Well, you get what I'm saying. My risk tolerance is way lower than it is for the one-man show who's just working with his wife and his kids, who have like a very small monthly nut, that they're like, well, if I spend this $1,200 and I only get $1,250, well, I made $50, and it doesn't matter because I have nobody else to pay. Well, no, and so sometimes when I go to see people for the first time that are like, yo, I've got tons of stuff and I can wholesale to you, and I go see them, I mean, most of the time it's great. Most of the time it's on the level, and people have an understanding of who we are and what we've done, where we are, and they kind of have an idea of what they're getting into if they're soliciting us. But occasionally, you'll get somebody that reaches out, is like, yo, I've got tons of stuff to wholesale. Like, come to my spot. You go to their spot, and you're like,
$30.
Yo,
$50.
Yeah, and I mean, like, fuck. To be honest with you, I could deal with $30, $50. But when it's like, a big shirt, and it's like, oh, bro, I need $600 for that. It's like, dog.
Now it's
dog. Like, you might get $600 for this on eBay, but like, I don't work on 30% margins. I just don't. That's not my business model. I have massive overheads, mouths to feed, and it doesn't make sense for me. I look at that money, $600, and I go, how many products can I make for Frankie with $600? Right? That could turn into this much money. Whereas that $600, maybe I'll make $200 on it. After minus the work and the effort, the shipping, I've made $150. What's the fucking point? So I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying, like, if that's your lane, do it. Do you. But understand, if you're going to deal with big boys like me and Drew, F as in Frank, if you're going to deal with big boys like my boy Sean, round 2, if you're going to deal with, there's other big boys out there that have a lot of overhead, a lot of stores, a lot of employees, a lot of things that you don't know about, a lot of costs. Like, they're producing new lines, things that are costing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of upfront money. Don't expect them. You bring them a Chicago Bulls rap tee. Sorry, guys. I just have to say the Chicago Bulls weren't rappers, except maybe Dennis Rodman might have done a shitty rap.
That's
at one
borderline,
point.
yeah.
But if you have a Chicago Bulls rap tee and, you saw it go for $700 on Chris's virtual, whatever the fuck it is, don't think that you're going to get $500 from a guy like me or Sean Witherspoon, because that's all subjective. You may get $700. Your high bid may be $300. And we're not willing to take a chance on shit like that. We got people to pay. We got mouths to feed. If you bought, and here's a case in point, okay? This is a really classic way to look at things. This will give you some background on it, guys. Was it yesterday or the day before? At one of my rag yards, I picked a 3D emblem, Hogs Gone Wild tee, right? Size medium, so not the most desirable side, but front and back print, great condition, nicely thinned out. I know I've seen the tee at the high point probably go for a couple grand or more, but it's down. The market's down on those. And because it's Black Friday and everything like that, we've got tons of money coming in, but we've got a lot of projects on the go, so we've got a lot of expenses to pay. And I just wanted to move the shirt. So I put it up on eBay, which if you follow me on Instagram, I don't usually sell stuff on Instagram. I put it up, send your offers. I got a shitload of offers within like 10 minutes. And, you know, I got an offer for, one guy offered me like $600. I said no. And then he came up to $850. I said no. And then I said, I'll do it for $1,000 shipped. And then he said, $900 please, ship, blah, blah, blah. And on the spot, I said, you know what? I need the money right now. I got a big payroll coming out. Yep. I've got all these projects. I got all this stuff, like accounts payable. I need cash flow needs money right now. Mind you, like we're waiting on tons of money to coming in, but there's a process when you're corporate, right? Yep. Sometimes it takes 2, 3, 4 weeks for that money to roll in. And so I'm like, yeah, fuck yeah, $900. This shirt cost me $3, right? Done. Lo and behold, that night I got an offer for $1,400 from another Thai guy. But I'm not gonna fucking do that. I'm not gonna renege.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It's like that mentality of like holding out for like the absolute top dollar works for some people, and I'm not knocking it. I'm not telling people what to do, but just it's things to consider, right? If you bought a shirt for $3 and you can get $900 which is like, what is that? It's like $1,100 Canadian. It's basically you got the shirt for free. You just basically got $1,100 for free.
Yeah.
Take it. Don't be a dickhead and refund the guy and go, sorry, I know I told you, I know we made the deal and we basically did a virtual handshake, but I got an offer for $500 more, so I'm going to fuck you and do this. Have some integrity. Keep your word. Do the thing, you know what I mean? And just keep it moving. It's like, I don't know, man. It's one of those things where like I see a lot of people like holding on for this top dollar more and more because they're like, and they love to quote the lives.
Oh man, yep.
Which is like a bit of a pet peeve for me. Although I try not to take anything too personal.
And like we've been on the lives and done well, and like I love Chris, but it is.
I love Chris too.
It's annoying when you hear people will come into the shop and try to sell something. Say, hey, I saw this go for. I think it could go for $5. They'll know we're on the fleet. Like we've done the fleet.
Yeah.
They'll come and say, I think you guys could get $6 for this on the fleet. Would you do $4? It's like, well, what if we don't get, like, first off, we pay to go on there.
Yeah.
And then, like, so that comes out of our profit.
Yeah.
And then we got to ship there's this, people just don't get it, right? They're like,
and then my time.
Of course. And then it's like, we only get so many items to put on there. Like,
yeah.
So it's like to think, I understand completely.
You understand what I'm
about
saying?
The thieves, man. Like,
yeah.
I think you guys could get $6. It's like, but that's our maximum market.
Yeah.
And it's like, we have stuff that we paid little for that we'd like to get the cash out on. Like, again, we can't give you $450 to maybe make $500.
Exactly. It doesn't make sense because that $400 could go to buy a whole bunch, like
completely,
our whole 20 shirts that you could easily double up on. Right. So it's like, you got to think about
it. It is a confusing thing for people though, I think, because they see they'll see us sell a shirt, our highest selling shirt or whatever, for thousands of dollars, and then they're going, well, give me a few hundred for this one. Like, it's like, well, that one's not worth that.
That was not that good.
It is a strange market, man. It's such a wild thing, but
it is.
What a beautiful game we're a part of.
Yeah, it is great. You know, I mean, the good, the bad, and the ugly, it's all part of it. And you know what? It's incredible that our industry has got to this point.
Yeah.
If I swear to God, 15 years ago, if I would have talked to some of my Japanese guys, my Japanese clients and friends, Mr. Yamada, love you. Tomo, Hundreds Buyers, love you. Snug, love you. All these guys, if I would have talked to them 10 years ago, 15 years ago at the Bull and said, yo, do you ever think that like this, this ODB and Janet Jackson shirt could fetch $5,000-$6,000? I don't know what the highest it sold for, but I'm just conjecture, right? Like, do you ever think they would laugh? They would literally throw up their breakfast burrito at the Rose Bowl, and but this is where we are. Yeah. So, what an incredible thing. There's old heads that hate it. Yeah. They're like, why the fuck? But it's like, no, why not?
Isn't it good more people are taking interest and more people are paying a higher premium? And like, even if it's stuff that you don't like, comes back to the balance. Even if it's stuff that you don't personally like love, you don't fuck with, whatever, it's nice that we can sell it.
Yeah.
Right? Like take all my Disney stuff. I'm not rocking a Mickey Mouse to you.
No. And I'm like, looking at Winnie Pooh sweatshirts that I bought today and Eeyore and, fucking whatever the hell it was, like Twinkerbell. And I'm like, man, like these are sweatshirts that are coming out now, like, like not like crazy, probably not like they were 5 years ago, but like they're still readily available. And I'm like talking to Drew and we're like, man, we're getting like, sometimes we get $100 US for these online.
It's wild. Yeah.
And I'm like, thank you, people. Thank you, young generation. Thank you guys that are out there buying this stuff because I'm a realist. I'm 43, man. I got 2 kids. I'm kind of out of that loop. Although I understand it, but if you guys, if it means that much to you, just like a starter jacket meant to me 15 years ago, that I could go to Kensington and buy for $20, but I would be willing to spend $100 on, then good for you, because that means something to you, and there's value there. There's value for you. So fuck what everybody thinks. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. And it's one thing you kind of touched on too was people like, more than anybody about how the markets fluctuate and how it's changed. And people will say, why didn't you hang on to this thing? Like, do you not kick yourself as got bills to pay, man? It's like you got to sell stuff when there is a market. Of course you guys could have held on to every single thing.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't have been able to have any money to buy.
I guarantee you if we held on to every single thing, we would have lost out more than we would have made.
Yeah.
There's some things we would have made ridiculous margin on that would have been like, holy shit. But there's a lot of things that would have fucking bottomed out. Case in point, East West Musical Instruments. Are you familiar? Mm-mm. Okay, it's a leather jacket maker out of San Francisco from the 60s and 70s. They made custom-made leather jackets, super heavy hide. They have a leather tag on the inside. Anybody listening, look it up. You can look them up online. East West Musical Instruments, leather jackets. And they made leather jackets for rock stars, people like Janis Joplin, people like Jimi Hendrix, people like The Doors, all those type of hippies back in the day. But they also made them for anybody who was willing to pay for them. 10, 12 years ago, you would be hard pressed to sell any of them for less than $1,000 US. Now you can pick them up for $200-$300.
So if you were stockpiling those forever,
you're
buying those for $300-$400 a pop.
Yeah, if you're stockpiling them forever at the height, thinking they were just going to keep going up, you would have lost your shirt.
Yeah, it's a crazy game,
right?
man. Yep.
So you can't call it. I mean, I try to do forecasting. I try to do trend forecasting. It's funny enough, we're starting to sell members-only jackets now on urbanoutfitters.com. And, well, we're not trying to. We started selling them just because we're trying new products, which, funny enough, was one of the items I used to wholesale to them when I worked for my dad, because my dad supplied Urban Renewal way back from in the 90s. And so we put one or two up on, or no, we put a few up on Urban Outfitters, and they sold like that for big money. So today I was cleaning my warehouse, last night I was cleaning my warehouse, and at the bottom of a Gaylord box, I found a handful of them, and I'm like, these are going straight to Drew, straight up to Urban, because otherwise I probably would have sold them for $15.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
cyclical, man,
it really
and
is.
you never can call it, right? So, okay, but great conversation,
Yeah,
great conversation.
definitely.
But
I was gonna try to pull us back there.
well, I'm gonna pull us back. So Josh Roeder starts working for me. We have this thing in common. He's younger than me, but he's very versed in hip hop and urban culture. He knows a lot of guys in urban culture and fashion in Toronto that I don't even know because of the sneaker thing, mostly because he's really like in tune with the sneaker thing, which goes hand in hand. And so I'm like, let's just start fucking hoarding this shit. Like, it's all my stuff because I'm buying it, but he works for me at picking it, right? But we kind of created this like camaraderie and this kind of we're friends, man. We ended up becoming really, 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 really close friends, and so we amassed this massive collection, massive, like everything from like MCM, Louis Vuitton, Chanel jackets, like the like Dapper Dan styles, to like rap tees, all the wickedest sports tees, all the starter stuff, tons of Polo, tons of Tommy, all the weird urban brands like Carl Kanai and Cross Colors, like anything and everything you think of. And then we started a eBay page called Hoboken and Haberdashery. And that was what we coined it. Josh came up with the name, Hoboken and Haberdashery. And I loved it because, you know, I had been to Hoboken, New Jersey, and I know what the word haberdashery means. And it was just, it was cool. It was a merging of old and new, so to speak, right? Hoboken being like ground zero for like, you know, Stretch and Bobbito buying like Nikes in the 80s and like where all the like the urban stores were in Jersey across the river. And haberdashery being like a high-end like men's outfitter hattery, right?
Cool name.
And so we started a eBay page that, you know, our agreement was like I bought all the goods and he initially just did all the listing and handled the eBay shit. And this was a complete aside from our other working relationship where he worked for me as a picker. But because we just wanted to test the water, and so we started Hoboken Haberdashery, and it was like a split down the middle, after cost. You know what I mean? Like after I recouped my cost for the goods, after I recouped my cost for the eBay fees and all that bullshit, then we split the profits down the middle, and it worked out great. And then eventually he got his girlfriend, I think her name is Chantel, involved, and she was working for us too, doing that. And you know, I can't remember the timeline exactly, if that started before this or if this started before that. But around the same time, same era, I was wholesaling to a woman by the name of Anne and her business partner Sandro, who owned Odyssey on Queen Street. They had a small shop called called White Lodge, and they had a big shop called Lavish and Squalor, which I think was their last shop. Which I think is closed down now, but it was there for a long time. It was near like Friendly Stranger, like near City TV. Great store, 2 levels, big, carried lots of heritage brands, really cool store. And I supplied them with all their vintage, which was like flannel shirts, buffalo plaid jackets, cowboy boots. Like it was hipster, kind of Canadiana vintage. And I was really close friends with them. And they knew that Josh was working for me at the time, and that we were amassing this wicked collection, and they would see us out at parties because Josh and I would go to parties dressed in the 9s and doing our shit, right? And kind of guerrilla marketing, like promoting it through however we could. And they approached us because one of their stores, White Lodge, was closing down, and they had taken all the inventory out and redistributed it to their other doors on Queen Street. And so it was an empty store. And they said, look, we have this empty store. We have it for 2 more months or something like that. It's just going to sit empty. Are you willing to, are you interested in potentially taking it for a pop-up? And I was like, fuck yeah, we have all this inventory. Let's just fucking do this. So me and Josh discussed it. We were like, yeah, we're going to do it. So we did our first pop-up at this place called White Lodge in Toronto. Right off Queen Street. So it's like, it was literally like the first store off of Queen on like one of those little side streets, like near City TV. And we got like Toronto Life down there, I think. We got like whatever the Toronto Rag was at the time, like the free newspaper, Tribe magazine. I don't know. I can't remember what the fuck it was, but we got them down there, and everyone and their uncle showed up, man.
Sick.
It got like a ton of attention, and it was, you know, Josh was really good at merchandising because of his background. He's a very detail-oriented, meticulous guy in that regard, and had retail experience because his best friend growing up was Joel Carmen, whose dad owned Over the Rainbow, who coincidentally enough, my dad and Joel Carmen were friends and acquaintances back in the day because Yorkville was hippie mecca in the 60s and 70s, and they're both Jewish and they're both
Small world, man.
Garmentals. So anyways, so we did this pop-up at White Lodge, and it completely went off. And there's actually a video on YouTube you can check that kind of gives a quick run through of it. And we have all the rarest Jordan pieces on the table. We have and it's cool. It's merchandised so well where we had the Jordan 1 or Jordan 2 sweatshirt, but then we had the Curtis Blow LP where he's wearing it on the cover right there, just really in depth, really detail oriented shit where we went hard. We had racks of vintage Nike windbreakers. We had a rack of Troop. We had, rap tees when nobody was even checking for rap tees. And I wish I had those because they were probably $50, $70.
Yeah.
And they're probably thousands of dollars now, but such is life.
That is wild thought. It's cool thinking how you were talking about the merchandising in that to put a piece with a record it kind of lets everybody know who doesn't quite get it, lets them know why this is dope, why this is as cool as it is. This is why we're going crazy over it.
It is.
And do you think that's kind of what helped it pop off like that?
Well, I think it gives provenance, it gives people background, it gives people, when it, how do I say this? There's an old adage, you can't polish a turd, right? But if you have something great, you might as well present it in the most presentable way you can. And you might as well tell a story with it as well. If you can tell a story, it brings so much more value to the item. So when, we had a whole Run DMC spread. I think we had every Run DMC Adidas piece that was ever made.
Insane.
We had original Jordans there, OGs. We had all kinds of shit. We didn't have snapbacks. Okay? So this is the beginning. This is why I'm telling you about this, okay? So it goes off. Richard and Jesse from 69 Vintage, who I talked about earlier, they came, they're like, wow. You guys are really doing this. This is cutting edge. This is fucking forward thinking. They were the forward thinking guys, you know what I mean? Doing the eBay and getting all these really great contracts with big retailers in the United States, real mover and shakers. And now you fast forward a handful of years and it's they're coming to our thing going whoa, you guys are really pushing the envelope now.
You guys are the guys.
Yeah, you guys are one step ahead now. So that gave us a lot of confidence, I think. And, Josh continued to work for me. We continued to amass our collection. And yeah, so, that opened the doors for some other things. Right around the corner from there, I don't know, are you familiar with the store called Lounge?
I know of it mostly from
other people.
From your guys' podcast.
Oh, okay, sure. So Lounge, I'm not going to say it was the first because it likely wasn't the first. I can say with confidence it wasn't the first urban store, but it was the first urban store in Toronto of notoriety. Cool. And certainly being on Queen Street right across from Speaker's Corner, City TV, it was in a prime location. And Damon came from a great background because he was the distributor for all the original urban brands, Cross Colors and Echo and Fubu and Rockaware and Apple Bottom. He was the distributor for Canada. So he was so tied into that community. And so it was just second nature. I'm going to open my own fucking store too, right? So he opened Lounge. So Josh and I were doing this thing, Hoboken Haberdashery. And we did the pop-up with Lavish and Squalor. It was a hit. And Damon from Lounge kind of caught wind of it. And he was a friend of ours regardless. and he came by and was like, he was working, he had lounge, but he was also living and working in New York City part-time. And he was like, man, this shit could run in New York. I really want to do an event with you guys in New York. So we did a pop-up in New York with him. And it went off. But while I was getting all the product together to ship to New York, I realized there was a gap in our inventory where we had incredible stuff, but it was all like high value, high ticket items. And we needed like point of sale stuff, you know, like we needed something for people that like had 30, 40 bucks that wanted to buy something.
Here we go.
And here we go. So, you know, hats were always a part of the uniform, the outfit for us when we were growing up. Snapbacks and sports hats primarily. And so it's like, okay, that's a thing. So I went on eBay and I was able to find a lot of sellers, because this is way before anyone was checking for that were selling them. And they were selling them in bundles, like in groups. Like, remember Pop Moons was like one of the first guys I was buying from. That was his handle on eBay. And he would sell like a dozen Golden State Warriors, for instance, hats, all dead stock, new with tags, but they would all be from different brands. So you'd get a dozen Golden State Warriors hats, but like 2 would be starters, 2 would be sports specialties, there'd be some G caps, there'd be some, you know, whatever it was. You'd get like a variety, but you get like 12, and they were cheap. So I went and like bought like, I don't know, 12 dozen or 20 dozen caps from this guy from all different teams, good teams, like teams that I knew that would sell, mostly NBA or like Yankees or whatever. And I was like, okay, so we got some point of sale stuff for the show, not knowing how they were going to do, but I knew we like had our bases covered. Retail mentality, like have something for everyone, right? And lo and behold, one of the first things to sell out at our New York pop-up, which is a weekend pop-up, right in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, fucking Snapback sold out. And boom, light bulb went off. I was like, this is a thing. So we had a couple extra days in New York after the pop-up was done. And so like we were, you know, booting around, traveling around. We did some dead stock digging. We got put onto a couple spots by some of the customers that came through, like young guys from like Brooklyn and Queens that were like, yo, I know a shop that still got shit. So we went and did some digging and just cruised Canal Street. And there was guys on Canal Street set up with tables selling snapbacks for like $8, $10, $12. And I was like, damn, this is a thing, you know, like just light bulbs are going off. And yeah, so from that point on, I got the bug, because it wasn't just from the hats, but it was also from these dead stock places, like these old mom and pop shops that like kids put us onto in Brooklyn and the boroughs in New York and Jersey, that like they were selling new stuff, but they had so much old stock because they were mom and pop shops. They weren't Foot Lockers. They weren't Champs. These were like independently owned like sports and urban stores. And so we started digging hard, dead stock, you know, for clothes. Really, we were looking for clothes, but inherently at all these places they had hats. And we started selling hats online, and they started to move on eBay. And I started also wholesaling them, because I started to find guys that were distributors or guys that were holding like lots of like snapbacks, where I was able to buy like case loads initially. Like this is when I was starting to like first get my toes into it. So I'd like get a few cases and I'd be like, okay, Adrift. You know Adrift?
Yeah, of course.
So I'd talk to Mike and be like, yo, you want to carry snapbacks? Yeah, I want these snapbacks. These are hitting. These are great. They're new with tags, so it's easy for them. Yep. They're not dirty. They're not old. They're not secondhand. They're new old stock. So I started buying them all everywhere, $2-3 a hat from these guys in bulk, and I was wholesaling for $16.50 to retailers in Toronto, and then branching out and wholesaling them around North America. And just couldn't keep them in stock, to the point where I really started to branch out. At this point, Drew and I had started to go to the Rose Bowl. And I think around that time too, this is before, but like we're getting to the point where we opened our first Heifetz and Frank store. Yes, it's definitely before Heifetz and Frank, because me and Landlord, this is before we opened. This is when like Landlord wasn't involved in any business, any business with us. He had worked for me, and he was just kind of like one of my best friends, and he would just roll with us to the bowl all the time. So out in LA, I would cruise around, and I hit like really big in LA, in the LA area. I found one hat store that was just a hat store that had 2 shipping containers in the back in the parking lot full of SnapBacks, and I started buying them like crazy. And then I found the biggest one that I've ever found, which was Eclipse Specialties, which is a famous spot in North Hollywood. He was a distributor for the whole West Coast for hats, and mostly hats, mostly licensed sports caps, and he did a bit of clothing. Stumbled upon him freestyling as it was, driving around North Hollywood, and we drove past this warehouse that had a huge Starter logo painted on it and a huge Sports Specialties logo painted on it. And they were closed, but I was like, bowls tomorrow. We're coming back here first thing Monday morning. Sure enough, we did. And I don't know, I think we bought 5,000 hats and got them shipped back to Canada. And yeah, I mean, the rest is history, because that was just like I'm telling you, I had cases unopened, boxes, like 140. They would come in 12 dozen in a case, 144. These were unopened since they were made, of Raptor scripts, and any other kind of any other script you could think of, and not just scripts. Bulls hats made by GCAP. You know, who made the shark tooths and the waves and all that?
Sports Specialties, Logo 7.
Logo 7, yeah, like Logo 7. Yeah, well, Sports Specialties made some of them. Logo 7, it's like all the brands. And we were kids in candy stores at that point. They had so many. It was this warehouse, pallet racking. And he gave us all these worker guys to help us with ladders, and we were just handing them cases, and they were bringing them to the back and like laying them out. And so we did a huge pick, and then we went back and edited it back. We're like, yeah, we don't need these ones right now, like, because we had a budget we were working. We didn't have endless funds,
of course,
right?
Yeah.
But that was definitely probably one of our biggest buys to date ever. And my normal mentality would have been like, no, don't go too deep in inventory. But this was just such a hit. Like,
you knew
it was, yeah, we knew. It was like, these are fucking sold before we even pay for them. They're sold. So yeah, we bought like, I don't know, around 5,000 SnapBacks, I think,
sick.
And sent them all back to the house I was living in on Finch. And I started wholesaling like crazy at that point. And then we were selling them on eBay like crazy at that point. And that just set off this new kind of spin-off for what I was already doing. I never stopped doing vintage clothing, but I started traveling the world for vintage SnapBacks. I was finding them everywhere. I was going to Washington, D.C. and buying out all the distributors there. I was going to Texas, Dallas, Texas, buying from Steve Levine, who was the biggest distributor in Texas. Bought all his shit. I was going to everywhere and anywhere I could find him. I was buying from Europe. I'd find a guy from Europe that was like, yeah, I've got like 10,000 SnapBacks. Okay, put them on a pallet. Let's do it. Send them to my place. I mean, at one point, there's definitely at one point in time in our Vancouver warehouse. So, you know, a lot of shit happened in between that. 2007, my brother and I opened our Whistler shop, the first F as in Frank, and we joined forces. Because prior to that, we were two separate companies. Although we supported each other, we were two separate companies. We joined forces. Josh was still working for us, and Drew and I opened F as in Frank Whistler. And we were the first store, Scout's Honor, to ever have a snapback wall. And our first store in 2007 had a snapback wall. And it was just huge, man. It was huge. Like, we couldn't get enough of these fucking things. And so we were buying them everywhere and anywhere. And, you know, I don't like to float my own boat or brag and boast, but I think we did start that trend. We did start that thing. You know what I mean?
Sure.
There were other people doing it, but nobody on our level. And we went balls deep in that shit. And, you know, at one point in time, like I said, you know, we definitely had over 100,000 snapbacks in our warehouse at one point in time. Cases upon cases upon cases. We would do things like, we would find a guy that was like, I have 3 pallets of just Charlotte Hornets and they're all the same. And we'd be like, okay, we'll take them all. It was easy. It was fucking easy, you know? So then we opened F as in Frank Vancouver, at which point I moved to Vancouver because the workload was becoming too much for my brother. It was like he was overseeing our shop in Whistler, picking, and then about to oversee this shop in Vancouver. I had just had my first son, Jordan. And he was like, look, man, if we're going to do this shop in Vancouver, you kind of need to be out here. So I was like, all right. And my folks had moved out there at that point in time. My aunt and uncle were out there. My sister was out there. My grandma was out there. I had just had my first son. And I was like, you know what? I want to be out there too. Plus, I'm an avid snowboarder, like big time, just like my brother. And I was like, you know what? It's time for a change of pace. We kept our picking team here in Toronto and figured out a way to, like, you know, the logistics to make it all work. One of us had to come back once a month. And we traveled the world for years buying snapbacks. And we were known as the leaders in that. And I think we're still known as the first guys really that, like, pioneered that movement. And then, you know, you had everything from, like, Tyga doing, like, snapback songs and people coming through. And then, you know, we were even pivotal in a lot of the companies redoing snapbacks. I mean, you can go get snapbacks now at Champs, but then the guys who I mentioned, Eclipse Specialties, it was a guy named Gene, an older dude. I usually worked with his son-in-law, who was even older than me, but, you know, Gene was probably in his 70s or 80s, but he still worked every day. And he started off the heels of what we were buying. So we were buying so much. We were going back and back and back every month and buying pallet loads. And off the heels of that, he knew, like, he's a smart guy too. He's a fucking entrepreneur. He's been in the game. One of my missteps in my early dealings with him was because I was so eager. I was so eager and I was so young and didn't know how to approach it the right way per se, but I had propositioned him and I said, look, you're the distributor. You know every sports store, you know, west of Chicago because you supplied them. So can we make a deal where you give me the contact information for all those stores? Because I knew they also had clothes too, right? Or at least a lot of them.
Some, yeah, for sure.
And I was like, can we make a deal where, like, you know, I'll give you a percentage or whatever and da-da-da. And, like, immediately he was like, no. Because he's smart. So what did he do? He started contacting all of his old accounts and buying back all their old inventory. So I started going back to Gene and I'd be like, where the fuck did these come from? And he's like, oh, don't worry about it, you know, but they're here. It's a whole pallet of bowls. I'm like, okay, I'll take it. And then more and more people caught on, you know, other people were going. And so it kind of, like, over the years, it slowly dissipated until it dried up. I mean, I know there's still hats out there, but like for the comparatively, it dried up. So what did he do? He went and did a license with NHL and maybe MLB, and he started manufacturing snapbacks. He was one of the first guys before Mitchell and Ness redid it, before anybody else redid it. But yeah, that was a huge thing. You know what I mean? That really funded a lot of our early ventures because it was just, we were making money hand over fist and it was so easy. We were selling them in dozen bundles. We were wholesaling off our website when I was in Vancouver. $16.50 a hat, a dozen bundle was $200. And we were selling 10, 20, 30, 40 dozen a day.
Yeah.
So that was the whole snapback thing, man.
So sick.
And yeah, so that was a really interesting, incredible time in the industry and for us as a business, you know, like just out of left field, we created this movement. And look, now now it has a resurgence,
Yep.
right? It died for a while,
Definitely.
but now it's like it's back with a vengeance.
It's funny, man. I'm a little bit younger than you, but I do remember I remember that Tyga song, and like I remember that snapback wave. I was a guy buying them like one at a time from whatever stores. And thinking about it, you ever seen the movie or the documentary Cocaine Cowboys?
It sounds familiar.
It's really cool.
Yeah. What's it about?
It's kind of like the story of like cocaine in the 80s. And but the thing is, they're saying like there was one guy in Miami, and it was like he supplied 85% of cocaine to America.
Okay.
It's like I almost feel like that's you guys with the streetwear and the snapbacks. There was an era where it was.
It was.
And even like maybe you bought it from another store. It wasn't maybe not from Heifetz and Frank, but you guys were wholesaling to these stores.
Yeah.
And like you had your hands in.
Yeah. So it's like if you bought it from a Drift, or if you bought it from there was another store on Queen Street that were supplying. If you bought them from Lavish and Squalor, if you bought them from anywhere in Toronto, they were coming from us. They were coming from us 100%. And like, look, I want to just take a second to shout out some other pioneers out there that like are my good friends, acquaintances, colleagues, that were on the wave. Like Jacob from Boneyard. You know, he used to be Snapback to the Future.
Is that in Chicago?
He's in Chicago.
Oh,
yeah. Jacob's a homie. He was on it way back in the day. Justin McDaniel from Detroit. You know, he put me onto a lot of digs. I used to go digging with him. I used to do a lot of deals where there were guys like Justin who was small time, but he lived in Detroit. He knew spots. He had spots. And he was buying and selling on eBay, but small time. Like he'd go in and buy like 10 things and then sell it. But he knew that if he got someone like me involved, that we could go in there with 10 or 20 racks and be like, make a deal and get the prices way down. And I would do deals where I'm like, listen, Justin, he goes by Malachi. He's an OG. Justin, shout you out. He would be like, listen, Jess, I found this spot. You want to go do it? And my thing was always like, you take what you want. You know, you take your top 10% because I don't care about that. You know, maybe give me a 1-2 thing, but like that's not what I'm here for. I'm here for the bulk. You know, I want to take 5,000 hats, and you can take your like 200 best ones because I don't care because I'm just moving shit. You know, I might be like, oh, can I get that one because I want it for me?
Sure, yeah.
But, you know, but I did deals like that like crazy. You know.
That's almost going back to your dad's mentality.
It is in a sense, except that like these are things that I knew I could move like
you're kind of taking the best of what you learned
best
from
of both
him.
worlds.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
For sure.
And then like I was doing that with Brian Procell. You know, like Procell and I go way back. I met Procell when I did my first pop up in New York through Damon from Lounge. Shout out Damon. And so Procell would do the same thing with me because his business model is that he's highly curated and he sells to a very high-end clientele and a very specific niche grouping of things. So he would find spots in the tri-state area, and he would call me and be like, Jess, I found a spot. They got tons of shit. And he would go dig it for like a week before I came, and then he'd bring me in, and I would just clear it out. You know, like, and I would lowball people. Sure. Look, man, I'm a garmental, I'm a mover and shaker, and I'm, you know, like, a lot of these guys who had the stuff, they've been sitting on it for 20 years. So not only do they have money tied up in it, they probably have a loss on it at this point. When you factor in the storage,
sure,
and everything like that, right? It's like, so I'll go in and I'll be like, look, they'd be like, yeah, I want this much. And I'd be like,
you want it out the door.
I'm like, this is my offer. Take it or leave it. I'm on the next flight back to Toronto. And I would 9.5 times out of 10, I would get the deal. You know, and I had a lot of escapades like that. Like, I had a great manager at Heifetz and Frank warehouse in Vancouver when I lived in Vancouver named John Much, who went on to start a company called Agora in England, because he's a British guy. He moved back to England. But he was really savvy with like doing like internet sleuth digging. So he would like find all these weird pages and dig on eBay and solicit people and contact them and like make inquiries. And he found a guy in Charlotte, North Carolina, a skateboard shop that seemed to always have killer snapbacks, but we didn't know where it was from. So he did the sleuth work and figured it out, that it was all coming from this Korean-owned, like African-American hair products store and distributor in like a weird industrial area of Charlotte, North Carolina. And he was like, yo, I found the spot. And I'm like, hey, I'm going. He's like, can I please come? And I'm like, fuck yeah, you can come. Come, man. Let's go enjoy this together. It's funner anyways with someone else. Yeah. And this guy had 2 full 40-foot shipping containers of cases of snapbacks. Mind you, it was like 80% college, like NCAA stuff, but killer stuff.
Sure.
And at that point, it didn't matter because we were selling them by the dozen wholesale, and we couldn't keep them in stock. So it was like, as long as I can get them for my price, we're laughing. So we bought them all. I mean, I have endless stories like that, yeah. You know? But yeah, that really like gave us the financial means and the footwork, like the legs to stand on, so to speak, the jump off point to do a lot of the other projects that we did. So yeah, that's the snapback story in a nutshell, man.
It's amazing, man. I feel like we could do hours on like that's such
a
fun.
We could do a whole episode on snapback.
It's insane.
And we went on to do things with like we did one of the first collabs with Don C.
Okay, you know? Yeah, this is gonna be a whole new episode.
Yeah,
yeah.
Shout out Don. I love Don. Shout out to all my Chicago crew, man. Like Mano, Don C, Ibin. Shout out Reggie No. Shout out all the Darians. You know, love you guys, and you guys are unsung heroes of this whole shit, because you guys never got the shine that I feel you deserved, and we will tell your story. We will.
I love that, man. I got a lot of respect for how you put other people on, and if like, I would love to dive some more into this. Like, if you'll come back and I'll have you on again. I feel like we're just scratching the surface.
Oh, bro, we could do a 6-part series, man. I'm here.
I absolutely love it. Kind of where we're at right now is we're starting to get into the birth of Heifetz and Frank. This is where things are really. You're kind of an independent, and now you're making the big man moves.
Yep, absolutely.
Hell yeah, man.
So, you know, I know we're like getting down there on timing on this one, but and I know we've got time to do more, but just I don't want to leave Drew out of this, because Drew was pivotal. I mean, you're interviewing me, but Drew is my partner, my brother, my blood, my best friend. And Drew, who is 2 years younger than me, he was pivotal in this whole thing as well. You know, in the growth of it. When I was independent, he was independent. But he went through the same struggles as I did. You know, I was a bar back and a bartender and doing shitty jobs here at night while I was like working for my dad. And he was snowboarding during the day, trying to make ends meet, like trying to create a professional snowboard career. And then working at night, like doing banquet services and serving and in restaurants in Whistler and whatnot. And, you know, when I first got on eBay, like after I've been wholesaling, but when I first got on eBay, we were talking one night. I'm like, bro, eBay, you got to get on this. It's crazy. So we did some digging, both of us, and we found out there was some rag houses in Vancouver. So he started his own thing there. So he was digging and picking and selling on eBay on his own shit. And I was teaching him, we'd spend hours at night on the phone in front of our computers going through eBay. And I'd be like, yo, look at this listing. Okay, this is what you got to look out
No
for.
FaceTime, kids.
No FaceTime. So it was like, we were learning and growing together, you know what I mean? And building towards this bigger enterprise, so to speak.
Well, I love that, man. I'm the oldest brother in my family, so I got a lot of that hits in the feels,
Yeah.
man. I love that.
Yeah, totally.
It's nothing cooler than when you can do stuff with like your best friends, your family.
Mm-hmm.
I got a lot of respect for how you've put people on, and
Thanks,
it's sick,
man.
man. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure having you in. Do you think we could do a couple fun ones just to wind her down here?
Yeah, let's just do a couple.
I would love to have you.
So listen, first of all, this is not the end of the story.
We're scratching the surface.
Yeah. So let's do some Q&A, and then we'll end this first version of
This
the
is
series.
Jesse Hiefetz part 1.
Jesse Hiefetz part 1, and then we'll do some Q&A now, and then we'll schedule part 2.
I would love that, man.
Great.
Then seriously, dude, thank you for your time and like.
Oh, bro, this is a pleasure. And for those who don't know, I live 15 minutes from here, so it's fucking amazing.
I like just kind of whatever, pull the curtain back a bit. I feel a little bit for myself. I feel like I'm kind of in between the old heads, the young age. So like I like seeing what the kids are doing, and I have tons of respect for the guys who came before me. So
Sure.
hearing about these stories, man, it really is. It's cool to see how the path got paved, you know?
Yeah, man, absolutely.
And I think anybody, any younger vintage kids turning into this, I hope you guys, have appreciated the wisdom dropped, and it's a lot of, there's a lot of nuggets in there. Like you guys might want to listen back to this one and take it all in again, because it's not every day you get a vintage legend in the building to really.
Thank you so much. And
that was why I wanted at the beginning to kind of get that scale
Yeah.
and like talk about the years and the numbers and like.
yeah.
Heifetz ain't no part timers.
No, we're not part timers. We're full time. Actually, we're overtime. Yeah, double time and a half.
I love it, man.
Yeah.
All right, let's rock a couple fun ones here.
Yeah, hell yeah.
How about can you give us a couple crazy? You're a picker, man. You've been in there. You've been in the trenches. Crazy finds, crazy stories. For the general public, they might not know like the kind of characters you get there and
Sure.
like the stuff that pops up and like.
Sure.
What are some wild things over your years?
Okay. Yeah, I'll give you some random ones. Okay, so like first thing you asked, so some crazy pieces. Drew picked a piece in Toronto because when I was living in Vancouver, we would take turns coming back to Toronto because we had still employed a picking team here, but one of us had to come do the final sort,
Oversee.
pay, do the logistics and whatever, for a few days a month. Drew one trip picked a Filson jacket from 1914, dead stock, and we came to know later that it was like an obscure, even more rare version of the regular version of that piece, and it was trademarked on the tag 1914,
Oh my God.
and it was dead stock. Chin strap work jacket with a really unique pocket configuration that we sold for $20,000 US. So that was, I think that's our biggest piece to date.
Biggest single piece, yeah.
Biggest single
Amazing.
garment. Some other interesting stories. This is going back to like early 2000s. I used to pick at a rag house that was like off the Queensway, like in Etobicoke. It was a Polish-owned factory. Those are no longer and they're long gone. But a grenade came out of a bale, and they had to call the bomb squad with a robot.
Jesus.
So that was an interesting day. Definitely heard some sad stories over the years, some people being killed in the rag industry. There's a really sad story about a guy who the baling machine malfunctioned and came down on him a number of years ago. So sorry to damper the mood there. Another really this is a great one. This just happened yesterday. So I was picking at one of my rag yards, and this happened on today's what?
It'll be a few days before this comes out.
Yeah, so a couple days ago, Monday it was, because today's Wednesday. Monday, I was at a rag yard, picking, sorting. I empty one of my rolling buggies, and at the bottom is a portable USB key, just one of those little ones, right? And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Just curiosity killed the cat. So I'm like, got to throw this in my pocket, take it home. Plugged it into my laptop, and it's a photo album. So I start digging through the photo album, please don't be something super weird or sexual or illegal or fringe.
FBI kicks in the door.
Yeah. Funny that you say that, FBI. So I start looking through it, and it's mostly family pictures, but then there's some weird pictures of what looks to be big quantities of crystal meth on a scale, and with a ruler, and then some pictures of some evidence sheets. And then, so I go through this whole album and surmise that it's a family, but the dad works for the FBI in Indiana, because I could, doing some detective work. This from Indiana. And I stumbled upon a picture that was of a registration form for their son for the Boy Scouts. So it had a phone number and his name. And so I was lying in bed, and I'm just showing these pictures to my wife, and I'm like, this is wild. And I'm like, I think I should call them. She's like, don't call them. And I'm like, no, I'm fucking calling them. Because I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, because I also surmised that these were from around somewhere between 2012 and 2014. These pictures were from. So considerably old at this time. So I called the number and I said, look, is this the Lemlers? And the lady was like, maybe. Who's this? Right?
Sure.
And so I proceeded to tell her the story. I was like, listen, this is going to sound really weird, but I'm calling you from Toronto. My name's Jesse Hiefetz. I work in the used clothing industry, and I found this USB stick today in one of the places that I work, and I brought it home, and I opened it up, and it's pictures of you and your kids or your family. I don't know who it is. And I did a bit of detective work, and I figured out that this is who you were, and I'm calling you. And she's like, yeah, that is who we are. And she's like, this is fucking crazy. And I was like, well, I'm a dad and I have 2 kids. And if I had lost a bunch of pictures of my kids and from a decade ago from my kids and obviously some cool family functions and stuff like that, I would love to have it back. So I just wanted to call and see if you wanted it. And she's like, I would love it back. So I was like, okay, give me your address. And she was over the moon. She was like, this is the craziest story. That's so cool. This is something that you see on TV. And I was like, well, you know what? It is what it is. Give me your address. So I gave her her address, and she's like, please give me your information too. And, and so, yeah, so that was just a weird random story that
That's sweet.
I reconnected these people paying it forward with their old long lost thing. What else? I found
that one really brought the mood back from the guy getting crushed in the baler.
Yeah. There was a rag factory in Scarborough called SG that I had gone to since it's now closed down because Jamal, the owner, died a couple years ago. Rest in peace. But I had been going there for about 20 years since I worked for my dad. And one day a woman there opened a duffel bag and there was approximately $50,000 US cash in it. And, rest in peace, Jamal. But Jamal was a real hard ass. He was not the most nicest guy in the world. And I would say probably clinically bipolar. The woman gave the money to Jamal, and he didn't give her a red cent.
No.
Yeah.
He didn't throw her 500?
Didn't throw her 500, didn't throw her 5.
Oh my goodness, man.
50 grand cash,
Oh,
US.
You gotta take her out to lunch.
In a duffel bag.
Oh my God.
What else? I've found in like an old biker kind of hippie Levi's vest, denim vest before. I found a bag of weed with some hits of acid in it that were probably from the 60s or 70s. I didn't try the acid.
That was
Yeah.
Thank you for answering the follow-up.
And I didn't smoke the weed either because, like, I lived in BC at the time. So, like, come on. Sticks and stones. So, but, yeah, I mean, shit, man. Tons and tons of stories. Like, I'll think of more for
Definitely,
next
man.
time. Yeah, for
And
sure.
I'm sure, again, that's just the scratch on the surface
Yeah.
on the wild times. This has been
Yeah.
so much fun, dude. I want to just ask one thing,
Yeah.
if you could leave us on. Like I was saying, I hope there's a ton of vintage guys tuning into this. You guys have extreme longevity since 67. Your family's been doing it. What kind of advice can you give to, the newer pages, the guys who have been around for 5 years, the guys who have been around for 10 years? What sort of advice can you impart on the vintage community?
Great question.
Because it's awesome to get to pick your brain while we've got you here.
I think there's a few different things I'd like to say about this. One thing that I've definitely noticed in recent years, with the advent of like a lot of smaller sellers, a lot of social only sellers and stuff like that, and more recently even with COVID and the lives and everything like that. If you're looking to create a career and make a business in this industry, you need to move away from that mentality of, and again, you have to take this with a grain of salt because everyone's situation is unique, and you may be that person with low overhead and lots of time living in your mom and dad's house that you can do this. But if you're trying to make a serious career out of this, that you could see yourself, potentially getting married, raising a family, and living off this and buying a home, you need to be able to let go of, not get attached to your inventory. Just because you saw that Chris sold a shirt on 1980 something Co for some price, it doesn't mean that shirt is the end all. That isn't the end all be all of that shirt. That's a unique circumstance. You have to understand the factors that go into that. The right people on that live at the right time that had the right amount of money. Yep. There's so many factors that go into that. So don't rely on that crap because I hear it too much these days. Well, I saw it go for this. Well, who gives a shit? Case in point, like I said to you earlier, bought a shirt for $3, got an offer for $900, took it, got an offer later for $1,400. So what? You know what I mean? Yep. It doesn't matter. Keep it moving. Turn your inventory. Thing about our industry, guys, is that for all those people listening out there, guys and girls, there's always more clothing. Toronto as a city in the rag industry is grading over 1 million pounds of clothing every fucking day. Okay? Think about that. Really, 1 million pounds of clothing per day in our city gets sorted and graded. If you go to Texas, now you're talking probably about millions of pounds. If you go to India, Pakistan, Dubai, now you're talking about some factories that I know of that do 1 million pounds in a fucking day. So the reason I'm bringing that up is just to give perspective that holding on to one silly shirt like for dear life just because you think you can eke an extra $50 out of it, it's not worth it in the grand scheme of things. There's always more clothes. Turn it, get your money out, buy more clothes. It's like investing, okay? the longer you hold on to the product, the more you're losing. Whether you believe it or not, it's reality. If you buy a shirt it's like the stock market or any type of investing that you could do. You buy a stock, it goes up, you sell it, then you can buy more stock. Then you can sell it goes up, then you can sell it, then you can buy more stock. It's like compound interest. But if you sit on your wonder on a shirt because you're waiting for that extra $100 or $200, well, think about what you could do with the $1,000 offer that you got for it if you paid even $100 or $200 for it. But I mean, in the ideal situation, you ragged it and you paid $5 or $8 a pound for the shirt, and it cost you a couple bucks. You made $1,000. Go out and buy $1,000 worth of more rag, because that's how you're going to get ahead. You know, I respect and admire the people that curate collections, but there's a major distinction between being a collector and a business person. And unless you can determine which one of those are, you can't be both. And I don't mean you can't be a collector and a seller. You can collect stuff. But if your whole inventory is a collection, then you're not a seller. You're not a business. You're a collector. So you need to determine what you want to do and make some goals and figure out the best way to get to those goals. I don't like carrying inventory. So this is just further to your question. I don't carry a lot of inventory. I got tons of Japanese customers coming to town. I know them all because I've been doing this for so long. And they hit me up and they say, can I come to a warehouse? And I always say, sure, you can come to my warehouse, but there's not much there.
Yeah.
Why? Because I fucking buy it and I sell it. You know, unless it really means something to me, I hold on to it. I don't lose sleep over a couple $100 left on the table. Pay it forward, man. Everybody's got to eat. If you're trying to get top dollar for your t-shirt, that has to be to the end user. That's D2C, direct to customer. That's not that commonplace in our industry. Like I said earlier in this podcast, this is an incestuous industry in many ways. One of those ways is that when I just did the Dead Stock Depot on Sunday, I could probably say with a lot of confidence that at least 30 or 40 of the people that I sold to are resellers. So how can I resell them for top retail dollar? I can't. Unless they're just they have some scheme where they're going to stash it away. Mm-hmm. And that's not even my MO. You know, my MO is leave something on the bone. I paid $3 for this shirt. You're going to pay me $300 for this shirt? You think it's $500? Great. Go for it. I don't fucking care, man. I want to take that $300, reinvest it, and do more shit. You know? I guess another part of that, another answer to that question is, do what you love. Gravitate to what you know. You know what I mean? Focus on what you love. I don't love everything that we sell, but there's certain categories that I love. And those categories, giving those categories my all, have allowed me to build a company that lets me now do all of the other stuff, right? So be passionate, do things with passion, do things that you like. You're always, whether it's vintage clothing or anything, if you're doing something that you're passionate about, you're doing something that you love, you're going to do it better than any other thing that you don't love or you don't have passion for, right? That's just inherent in human nature. And then lastly, I think, be willing to bend with the trends. Be willing to sell stuff. If you're in this preface this. If you're in this for a business, if this is a business for you, business means profit. Business means making a profit. You know, you got your gross, then you got your net. You want to make sure you're netting. If you're in this for business, then you got to be willing to move with the trends. I know so many old heads that for some reason or another, feel like they have to uphold some certain level of inner integrity, you know, amongst their peers and not stray from their you know, initial, you know, mantra or whatever it is. Like, oh, you sell Disney shirts, that's so gay. And it's like, dude, it's a fucking business, man. Are you in this for a business or do you want to be cool?
Yeah.
You know, and who are you trying to be cool to?
Yeah, I mean, like gatekeeping.
Yeah, gatekeeping is just...
gatekeeping doesn't make money.
It doesn't make money, man. And it's like, and a lot of these guys are the guys that'll say like, I don't care about being cool. But yeah, you so do, because you're the one that's saying, why are you selling these gay Disney shirts? You know, they're so stupid. It's so lame. And I said, well, if you could buy something for $5 and sell it for 50, you're telling me you wouldn't?
Yeah.
Well, then who's the one that really cares about being cool? I don't give a shit. It's a business. I got 2 kids. I got plans for my future. You know, like, I got 55 employees that I want to eat, and I want to be able to treat them well. And I want to support the community. And I want to see where this thing can go, man. You know, vintage on a whole.
Yeah.
Like, where the fuck can we push this thing? It's going mainstream. Like, I'll leave you with this, you know, like, we're in the Hudson Bay Company now. If you would have asked me that 10 years ago, I would have said, hell no. We're going to be in Nordstrom soon. You know, like, these are things that, like, people in the vintage industry, a lot of people would say, well, some people would say that's selling out. Fuck you. I don't care. If that's your mentality, don't talk to me. Another thing is like, a lot of people would say, like, that's never going to happen. Well, it's happening. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Collaborations with some of the world's biggest corporations, literally some of the world's biggest corporations that we are doing right now. So what can I really leave you all with? Everything is fucking possible. Anything and everything is possible in this industry. Your biggest and only limitation is your own self. So don't put yourself in a box. Everything's possible. If you set your goals high and you have the drive and you have, you know, the passion and you have the patience, then anything in this industry is achievable. So let's close it on that.
That's incredible, man. I called you Drew. Sorry,
man.
All the talks got me. But Jesse, man, it's been an absolute pleasure having you in. And anybody who's checking into this and has tuned in, I hope like the words didn't go over your head. I hope you've listened to this and I hope somebody's listening to this while they're out picking, they're out like at the thrifts, and
hell yeah.
I hope it's fired them up, because you touch on a lot of stuff, man, that like even like me being a shop owner, you know, it's really given me direction, and it's like this has been a great talk, dude.
Awesome.
It's been awesome, man. I hope you will come back.
I'm definitely coming back because I got a lot of shit I want to talk about.
I do feel like we got a lot more to cover.
I want to talk about Frankie.
We haven't talked Frankie. We haven't talked about your production.
Yeah, I want to talk about my personal life.
We didn't get into any of those cool concerts from the 90s.
Yeah, the concerts, like all the celebrities and interesting like people that we've rubbed shoulders with, all the projects we've done. Excuse me.
I'm telling you guys, we are just scratching the surface. Yeah,
just scratching the surface. So this is just... let's call this the prelude.
Hell yeah. This has been episode 1 with Jesse Hiefetz. This is episode 20 of the Gabbin with Gavin podcast. We're in 1990 studios. Thank you to Town Brewery for the delicious beers during the interview. Jesse, it was a pleasure, man. Thank you so much for joining me.
Shout out Vintage 905. Shout out everybody in and around Toronto, the 416, the 905. Shout out the whole community worldwide, the vintage community. Shout out Drew. Shout out the whole Heifetz and Frank crew, the Frankie Collective crew. Shout out to my wife and kids, and all my mentors and all the people that paved the way for me. Shout out Roger. Shout out Black Market. Shout out Simon. Shout out Shoney. Shout out Lynn and Frank from Exile. Shout out Dave Himmel, and anybody. Shout out Hellers, anybody and everybody that's helped to educate me and teach me and mold me and my brother and helped us along the way, big or small. Love you guys. Appreciate y'all. And hold tight for episode 2.
Hell yeah. We're out.
We're out.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thanks, man.